A mathematician's dead in a sealed vault. No way in, no weapon, just a note. The answer is 0. I'm Archie Goodwin, and Nero Wolfe's cracking this impossible case. A killer's using sound to steal $1 billion code-breaking proof. Suspects lie, shadows stalk, and I'm dodging break-ins to set a trap. From a humming vault to a cunning killer caught, we unravel the unsolvable. Want the truth? 0's where it starts. Chapter 1. The Impossible Client. I was in the office, pretending to dust the bookshelves, which is a job I leave to Fritz unless I'm dodging something worse, when the doorbell rang. It was a Tuesday in April, and the clock on my desk said 47 a.m. Nero Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, communing with his orchids, and wouldn't be down until 11. That left me, Archie Goodwin, to handle whoever was interrupting my morning. I crossed to the hall, glanced through the one-way glass in the front door, and saw a man who looked like he'd been wrestling a theorem and lost. He was short, maybe 5'6", with a mop of greying hair that hadn't seen a comb since Einstein was a patent clerk. His tweed jacket was rumpled, one elbow patched, and his tie was knotted like a noose he'd forgotten to tighten. His eyes behind thick glasses darted like a squirrel's, and he clutched a leather satchel as if it held the formula for eternal life. I didn't know him, but I knew the type. The kind of client who'd either bore Wolfe to death or get him so curious he'd skip lunch. Either way, it was my job to find out. I opened the door. "Yes." "Mr. Wolfe," he said, his voice high and urgent, like a violin string about to snap. "I must see Nero Wolfe. It's a matter of life and death." "Mr. Wolfe's busy," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm Archie Goodwin, his assistant. Care to give me a preview?" He blinked rapidly, as if I'd asked him to solve a differential equation on the spot. "My name is Elias Vaughn, Dr. Elias Vaughn. I'm a professor of mathematics at Columbia. I have a case, no, not a case, a catastrophe that only Mr. Wolfe can solve. The police have failed. Everyone has failed. Please, Mr. Goodwin, I beg you." I sized him up. He wasn't selling vacuum cleaners, and he didn't look like a crank, though the line between genius and nutcase is thin. His desperation was real, and Wolfe's bank account could use a boost after last month's orchid shipment from Ecuador. I stepped aside. "Come in. I'll see if Mr. Wolfe can squeeze you in at 11. He shuffled into the hall, clutching his satchel tighter. I led him to the office, pointed him to the red leather chair by Wolfe's desk, and offered coffee. He shook his head, his eyes scanning the room like it was a crime scene. I sat at my desk, typed a quick note to Wolfe on the house line. "Client, Dr. Elias Vaughn, math prof, says life and death case, police stumped, and sent it to the plant rooms." Wolfe wouldn't read it until he came down, but it made me feel productive. "While we wait," I said, leaning back, "why don't you tell me about this catastrophe?" Vaughn adjusted his glasses, which were sliding down his nose. "It's complicated. A murder. An impossible murder. No one can explain it. The police called it unsolvable, but I know it's not. I know because I'm next. That got my attention." "Next for what? The chopping block?" He flinched. "Yes, I think so. The victim was my colleague, Dr. Leonard Quayle, a brilliant number theorist. He was found dead 3 weeks ago, in a sealed vault at the university. No weapon, no suspects, no way in or out. The police investigated, found nothing, and closed the case. But I've been followed, Mr. Goodwin. I've seen shadows, heard footsteps. Someone wants me dead too. I raised an eyebrow. A sealed vault, like a bank? No, a research vault. It's in the mathematics building, used for storing sensitive documents and equipment. It's airtight, soundproof, with a single door locked by a combination only Quayle knew. He was alone when he entered. The next morning he was dead. I whistled. Sounds like a magic trick gone wrong. How'd he die? A blow to the head. The coroner said it was instantaneous, but there was no weapon in the vault, no blood, splatter, nothing. Just Quayle, slumped over his desk with a cryptic note in his hand. What did the note say? Varn hesitated, as if revealing it might summon the killer. The answer is 0. That's all. 5 words in Quayle's handwriting. The police thought it was a suicide note, but Quayle wasn't suicidal. He was difficult, yes, but not suicidal. I jotted that down. Difficult how? He was arrogant, competitive. He'd alienated half the department, including me, if I'm honest. We were rivals working on the same theorem, a breakthrough in analytic number theory. But I didn't kill him, Mr. Goodwin. I swear it. Nobody said you did, I said, though I filed his denial away. Clients who protest too much often have secrets. So, the police gave up, and you think you're next because... 2 days after Quayle's death, I found a note slipped under my office door. It said, 0 is coming, same handwriting as Quayle's note. I took it to the police, but they dismissed it as a prank. Then the shadowing started. Last night, someone tried to follow me home. I barely lost them in the subway. I leaned forward. You got a description of this shadow. Tall, wearing a dark coat and hat. That's all I saw. It was dark and I was panicked. The clock ticked to 10:59. Wolfe would be down any second. Assuming he didn't send a message telling me to boot Varn out, I studied the professor. His hands trembled and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool room. He was scared, all right, but scared people can lie as easily as calm ones. Sit tight, I said. Mr. Wolfe will decide if he's interested. Fair warning, he's not cheap, and he doesn't like vague cases. You'll need specifics, names, dates, motives. Varn nodded, gripping his satchel like a life preserver. I have documents. Quayle's research notes, my own correspondence. I'll give Mr. Wolfe everything. The elevator hummed, and the office door swung open. Nero Wolfe entered, all 1/7 of a ton of him, in his custom yellow shirt and brown suit. His eyes, small but sharp under his broad forehead, flicked to Varn, then to me. He crossed to his desk, settled into the oversized chair that could hold him without groaning, and adjusted the orchid in his lapel. A Miltonia Roesley, if I had to guess. "Good morning, Archie," he said, ignoring Varn. "Report." I stood because Wolfe likes formality when clients are present. Dr. Elias Varn, professor of mathematics at Columbia, says his colleague Dr. Leonard Quayle was murdered 3 weeks ago in a sealed vault. No weapon, no suspects. Police called it unsolvable and closed it. Varn thinks he's next, claims he's been followed and got a threatening note. Wants you to solve the murder and save his skin. Wolfe's lips twitched, a sign of displeasure. He dislikes murder cases, especially messy ones, but his curiosity is a beast that never sleeps. He turned his gaze on Varn, who shrank slightly in the red leather chair. "Dr. Varn, Wolfe said, his voice a low rumble. "You presume much, interrupting my schedule. Why should I undertake a case the police have abandoned?" Vaughn straightened, finding some courage. "Because you're Nero Wolfe. You've solved cases others couldn't. Cases that defied logic. This murder is impossible. But I believe you, can crack it. And because if you don't, I'll be dead within a week." Wolfe grunted, a sound that could mean anything from contempt to intrigue. "Describe the vault." Vaughn swallowed. "It's in the mathematics building, basement level, 10 by 12 feet, concrete walls, steel door with a combination lock. No windows, no vents, just a small air circulator that's inaccessible from inside." Quayle entered at 8 p.m. on March 22nd, alone, as shown by security footage. The door wasn't opened again until 7 a.m. the next day, when a janitor found him. "And the combination?" Wolfe asked. Only Quayle knew it. The lock was electronic, programmed to his personal code. After his death, the manufacturer reset it, but the police confirmed it hadn't been tampered with. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. "The note! The answer is 0. "You're certain it was Quayle's handwriting?" "Yes, I've seen his notes for years. It was his." "And your note?" 0 is coming. Same handwriting. I brought it." Vaughn fumbled with his satchel, pulled out a folded paper in a plastic sleeve, and handed it to me. I passed it to Wolfe, who glanced at it, then set it on his desk. "Archie," Wolfe said, "call Inspector Kramer. Inquire about the Quayle case." I reached for the phone, but Vaughn interrupted. "The police won't help. Kramer himself said it's a dead end. They're convinced it's unsolvable." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "I do not consult the police for their conclusions, sir. I consult them for facts. Archie, proceed. I dialed Manhattan Homicide. Kramer wasn't in, but Lieutenant Rowcliffe, who hates me as much as I hate him, was. I kept it short, asking for the Quayle file. Rowcliffe growled that it was closed and none of my business, but I mentioned Wolfe's interest, and he promised to have Kramer call back, probably after lunch, knowing him. I hung up and reported to Wolfe. "Rowcliffe's touchy," I said. "Kramer'll call later." Wolfe turned to Vaughn. "Your fee. I require a retainer of $50,000, non-refundable plus expenses. If I succeed, additional payment will depend on the complexity of the solution. Do you agree?" Vaughn blanched. 50,000? I'm a professor, not a banker. I can manage 20, maybe 25. Wolfe shook his head. 50, or I return to my orchids. I watched Vaughn squirm. Most clients balk at Wolfe's fees, but the desperate ones find a way. Vaughn's fear was palpable, and I figured he'd cave. Sure enough, he nodded. "I'll get it," he said. "I have savings and I can borrow. Give me 2 days." "Very well," Wolfe said. "Archie, prepare a contract. Dr. Vaughn, leave your documents and the note. Return tomorrow at 11 with the retainer, and we will proceed. Until then, avoid dark alleys and melodramatic gestures." Vaughn looked relieved, then anxious again. "What about the person following me?" "Report it to the police," Wolfe said. "If you're still alive tomorrow, we'll discuss protection." I escorted Vaughn to the door, where he hesitated, as if the stoop might swallow him. "Mr. Goodwin, do you think he can do it? Solve the unsolvable?" I grinned. If anyone can, it's Wolfe. but don't expect him to hold your hand. That's my job." He managed a weak smile and shuffled out. I locked the door, returned to the office, and found Wolfe reading Vaughan's note. His lips pursed. The orchid was back in his lapel, and he looked like a man who'd just bitten into a puzzle. "He couldn't resist comments," I said, sitting at my desk. "An intriguing anomaly," Wolfe said. "A sealed vault, a cryptic note, a mathematical rivalry. If Dr. Vaughan is not delusional, this case may justify my attention." "Big if," I said. "He's jumpy as a cat in a dog pound. Could be imagining the shadow." "Perhaps," Wolfe said, "but the note is real, and fear is a poor liar. Call Saul Panzer. I want background on Quayle and Vaughan by tonight." I reached for the phone again, knowing this was the start of something complicated. A locked vault, a dead professor, and a note about zero. Even for Wolfe, this was a long shot. But as I dialed Saul, I felt that familiar tingle, the kind that comes when you know you're in for a hell of a ride. Chapter 2. A Puzzle Without Pieces. The morning after Dr. Elias Vaughan's dramatic entrance, I was in the office, nursing a second cup of Fritz's coffee, and wondering if our new client would show up with Wolfe's $50,000 retainer, or bolt for the hills. It was Wednesday, April 17th, and the clock on my desk read 10:52 a.m. Nero Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably whispering sweet nothings to his orchids, leaving me to handle the paperwork and the doorbell. I'd spent the previous evening on the phone with Saul Panzer, who dug up enough dirt on Vaughan and the late Dr. Leonard Quayle to make me think this case was either a gold mine or a headache. Maybe both. The doorbell didn't ring until 12:03 p.m., which was late enough to make me wonder if Vaughan had been scared off by his own shadow or Wolfe's fee. I crossed to the hall, peeked through the one-way glass, and saw Vaughan looking like he'd slept in a windstorm. His grey hair was wilder than yesterday, his tweed jacket more rumpled, and his satchel seemed to weigh him down like an anchor. "Open the door. You're late," I said, leaning against the frame. "Wolfe's not a fan of tardiness." "I'm sorry," Vaughan panted, stepping inside. "The bank took forever, and I thought someone was following me again. I switched cabs twice to lose them." I raised an eyebrow. "Same shadow as yesterday. Tall, dark coat, hat?" "Yes, exactly." His eyes widened behind his smudged glasses. "I saw them outside my apartment, then near the bank. I'm sure they were watching me." "Any details? Limp, tattoo, bared mustache?" He shook his head, clutching his satchel. "It was too quick. Just a shape, but I felt it." I filed that away, making a mental note to have Saul check Vaughan's tail. Either someone was after him, or he was paranoid enough to invent his own boogeyman. I led him to the office, where he collapsed into the red leather chair like a marionette with cut strings. His tie was still a disaster, and he smelled faintly of Subway and fear. "Got the retainer?" I asked, sitting at my desk. He nodded, fumbling in his satchel and producing a thick envelope. $50,000 certified check, as Mr. Wolfe requested. I took the envelope, verified the amount, and locked it in the safe. Wolfe's bank account would thank him, even if his digestion wouldn't after this case. "Okay, you're in. Wolfe's upstairs, but he'll be down soon. Want to tell me about this morning's chase?" Vaughan's hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses. "There's not much more. I left my apartment at 8, Went to the bank. For the check, I noticed the figure across the street. Tall, hat pulled low, dark coat. They followed me to the subway, then reappeared near the bank. I took 3 cabs, zigzagging, and lost them. I jotted that down. You're sure it's the same person as last night? Almost certain. The coat, the hat, it's distinctive. Before I could press further, the elevator hummed and Wolfe entered, all 1/7 of a ton, in a brown suit with a yellow shirt that could have doubled as a caution sign. He settled into his custom chair, adjusted the Miltonia in his lapel, and fixed Vaan with a stare that could peel paint. "Dr. Vaan," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you are late. I do not tolerate delays. Have you the retainer?" "Archie has it," Vaan said, shrinking slightly. "I apologize. Circumstances delayed me." Wolfe grunted, which meant he'd let it slide but wouldn't forget. "Very well. Archie, report on Mr. Panzer's findings." I flipped open my notebook. Saul checked out Quayle and Vaan. Leonard Quayle, 52, Columbia math professor, expert in analytic number theory. Brilliant, but a first-class jerk. Arrogant, loved stepping on toes. Feuded with half the department, including Vaan, over a theorem they both claimed. No wife, no kids, lived alone in a fancy apartment on Riverside Drive. No criminal record. Died March 22nd in the research vault, blunt force to the head, no weapon found. Police, led by Inspector Kramer, investigated for 2 weeks, found nothing, closed the case as unsolvable. I glanced at Vaan, who was staring at his shoes. Vaan, 48, also a number theorist, less showy but solid. No family, lives. In a walk-up near campus, no record. Saul says he's been jittery lately, skipping classes, dodging colleagues. Faculty confirm the rivalry with Quayle, but say Vaan's more likely to sulk than swing a club. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking under the strain. "Dr. Vaan, you neglected to mention the extent of your conflict with Quayle. Elucidate." Vaan's glasses slid down his nose, and he pushed them up. "It's academic, not personal. Well, not entirely. Leonard and I were working on a conjecture about prime numbers, a potential breakthrough in cryptography, worth millions if applied commercially. We collaborated briefly last year, but he published a paper without crediting me, claiming the core idea was his. I was livid, but I didn't kill him." "Did you confront him?" Wolfe asked. "Yes, in the faculty lounge, 6 months ago. It got heated. I called him a plagiarist. He called me a second-rate hack. Colleagues overheard, but it blew over, I thought." Wolfe's lips twitched, a sign he smelled something fishy. Who else had reason to wish Quayle dead? Vaan hesitated, as if naming names might jinx him. "Several people. Dr. Margaret Hensley, a colleague, lost a major grant because Quayle criticized her work to the funding board. Paul Rourke, a graduate student, accused Quayle of stealing his thesis ideas, and Dr. Simon Tate, another professor, blamed Quayle for blocking his tenure. But none of them could have gotten into that vault." Wolfe grunted again, filing the names away like cards in a deck. "Describe the vault's contents when Quayle was found." Vaan frowned, recalling details. A metal desk, a chair, Quayle's laptop, closed, no prints but his. Scattered papers, mostly equations and notes. The note in his hand, the answer is 0, in his writing, nothing else. The police searched for hidden panels, vents, anything. Nothing. "And the air circulator?" Wolfe asked, his eyes half closed. "A small unit in the ceiling, sealed, only accessible from outside for maintenance. The police measured it, 6 inches wide, impossible for anyone to fit through." Wolfe's eyes stayed half closed. A sign. He was thinking hard or dozing, though I'd bet on the former. Varn fidgeted, his satchel on his lap like a shield. After a long silence, Wolfe spoke. "Archie," he said, "visit the crime scene. Inspect the vault, the building's security, and the surrounding area. Locate the janitor who discovered the body and question him. Report by 6. I grabbed my hat from the rack. "Anything specific I'm looking for?" "Discrepancies," Wolfe said, which was about as useful as a blank crossword. "Dr. Varn, you will remain for lunch. Fritz is preparing chaudreau with beurre noir, and we have further matters to discuss." Varn looked like he'd rather face his shadow than Wolfe's table. "Lunch? I should get back to campus. I have a lecture." "You will stay," Wolfe said, his tone closing the matter. "Your lecture can wait. Your life may not." I hid a grin. Wolfe's idea of client care is to stuff them with Fritz's cooking until they spill their secrets or their guts. I left Varn to his fate and headed out, catching a cab to Columbia's mathematics building, a grey stone fortress on 120th Street that looked like it hadn't changed since Euclid's day. The building was quiet, with students drifting through, the halls like ghosts. I found the basement level, where the research vault was, and introduced myself to a security guard named Mike, who had a face like a basset hound and a badge that said he'd been there since the Nixon administration. I told him I was working for a professor, which wasn't a lie, and asked to see the vault. He shrugged and led me down a corridor that smelled of chalk and old coffee. The vault door was steel, 3 inches thick, with an electronic keypad that looked like it belonged in Fort Knox. Mike punched in a code, and the door swung open, revealing a concrete box about 10 by 12 feet, just as Varn described. A metal desk sat in the centre, a chair beside it, and a fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The air circulator was a small grate in the ceiling, barely big enough for a squirrel. No windows, no vents, no nothing. If Quayle was killed here, it was a magic trick Houdini couldn't have pulled off. I crouched, checked the floor for seams or trapdoors. Nothing. The walls were solid concrete, no cracks or hollow spots when I tapped them. The desk was bolted down, and the chair was standard issue, no hidden compartments. I looked up at the air circulator, a 6-inch square sealed with screws. Even a midget contortionist couldn't have squeezed through, and the police report said it was untouched. "Creepy, huh?" Mike said, watching me. "Guy dies in here, no way in or out. Gives me the chills. You on duty when it happened?" I asked. "Nah, night shift was Charlie, the janitor. He found the body, nearly had a heart attack. Cops grilled him, but he didn't know nothing." "Where's Charlie now?" "Probably in the break room, 3rd floor. He's here till 2. Thanked Mike and headed upstairs, poking around the building first. The basement had 2 exits, one to the main hall, one to a service alley, both with cameras. Saul's report said the footage showed Quayle entering the vault at 8 p.m, alone, and no one else until Charlie the next morning. The cameras hadn't been tampered with, per the police. I checked the alley door. Locked. No signs of forced entry. If someone got in, they were a ghost or a genius. The break room was a dingy space with a coffee machine and a table covered in donut crumbs. Charlie, a wiry guy in his 60s with a moustache like a push broom, was reading a tabloid. I flashed my PI license, said I was following up on Quayle's death for a client, and asked what he remembered. "Not much," Charlie said, folding his paper. "I opened the vault at 7, like always, to clean. Saw the professor slumped over the desk, blood on his head. Thought he was drunk at first, then saw he wasn't breathing. Called security, they called the cops. That's it. Anything? Odd? Papers out of place? Weird smells? Noises?" He scratched his chin. "Now you mention it, there was a faint hum, like a machine running, when I opened the door. Stopped quick, though. Probably the air circulator. Papers were messy, but that's normal for professors. Didn't touch nothing. Hear anything the night before? People in the hall, doors slamming? Nope. I was on the first floor till midnight, then went home. Building was dead quiet. I pressed him for more, but he was dry. I gave him my card, told him to call if he remembered anything, and headed back to the vault for one last look. The hum Charlie mentioned nagged at me, but it could have been nothing. I stood in the vault, closed the door and listened. Silence, except for the faint whir of the circulator. I tapped the walls again, checked the desk's underside, even climbed on the chair to inspect the grate. Zilch. By 4 p.m., I was back in a cab, scribbling notes. The vault was a fortress, the cameras airtight, and Charlie's story matched the police report. If Quayle's killer got in, they didn't use a door, a window, or a sledgehammer. I was starting to see why Kramer gave up. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office, a beer in hand, glaring at a stack of Vaughan's documents. Vaughan was gone, probably waddling back to campus after Fritz's shed row. I dropped into my chair and reported. "Vault's a tomb," I said. "Concrete walls, steel door, keypad lock, no vents big enough for a cat. Desk, chair, nothing else. Cameras show Quayle entering alone, no one else till morning. Janitor, Charlie, found him. Says he heard a hum that stopped when he opened the door. Could be the circulator. No signs of break-in, no hidden panels. Either the killer's invisible or Quayle bashed his own head." Wolfe sipped his beer, his eyes half closed. A hum. Interesting. The documents. Anything in them? Possibly. Quayle's notes suggest he was close to proving the conjecture he and Vaughan disputed. The note, "The answer is 0, may refer to a mathematical result, not a suicide. I require more data." "Like what?" "Quayle's laptop. Its contents may clarify his final thoughts. Also, the coroner's report. Details of the wound. Call Mr. Kramer." I reached for the phone, but Wolfe wasn't done. "And Archie, arrange for Saul to follow Dr. Vaughan. Discreetly. If he is being stalked, I want confirmation." I nodded, dialing homicide. Kramer was in, but not happy to hear from me. I mentioned Wolfe's interest in the Quayle case, asked for the coroner's report and access to the laptop. Kramer growled that the case was closed, but I leaned on Wolfe's reputation, and he grudgingly agreed to send the report and discuss the laptop tomorrow. I hung up, called Saul, and set him on Vaughan's tail. Wolfe set his beer down. "This case, Archie, is a puzzle without pieces. Yet pieces exist. We must find them." "Any theories?" I asked, hoping for a crumb. He grunted, which meant I'd get nothing yet. "Dinner is at 7. Fritz is preparing squab. Do not be late. I leaned back, staring at Vaughan's threatening note on Wolfe's desk. Zero is coming. The vault. The note. It was like chasing a shadow in a fog. But Wolfe's eyes had that glint, the one that meant his brain was already turning. I had a feeling this puzzle was about to get a lot messier. Chapter 3. The Brownstone Briefing. It was 6:15 p.m. when I got back to the Brownstone, my notebook stuffed with details from the Columbia Mathematics Building, and my head stuffed with questions that were piling up faster than dirty dishes in Fritz's sink. The vault where Dr. Leonard Quayle took his final breath was as sealed as a pharaoh's tomb, and the janitor's mention of a faint hum was the only thing that didn't scream dead end. Nero Wolfe was in the office, a beer in one hand and a sieve, scowl on his face, staring at Dr. Elias Vaughan's papers like they'd just insulted his orchids. Fritz was in the kitchen, working on squab that smelled like a reason to keep living, and I was ready to report before the dinner bell. I tossed my hat on the rack, dropped into my chair, and gave Wolfe the lowdown. The vault's a concrete bunker, 10 by 12, steel door with a keypad lock. No windows, no vents, just a 6-inch air circulator in the ceiling, sealed tighter than your wallet. Cameras show Quayle entering alone at 8 p.m., March 22nd, and Giand. Nothing until the janitor Charlie found him at 7 a.m. Charlie heard a hum when he opened the door. Gone in a flash. Desk, chair, scattered papers, no weapon, no trapdoors. I checked every corner. Zip. Either the killer's a phantom, or Quayle played whack-a-mole with his own skull. Wolfe grunted, a sound that could mean he was intrigued or just digesting. Lunch. He set his beer down. The hum. Elaborate. Charlie said it was faint, like a machine idling, but it stopped quick. He figured it was the circulator, but he's not exactly Thomas Edison. Could be something, could be nothing. Possibly, Wolfe said, his eyes half closed. The building's security. 2 basement exits, main hall and a service alley, both with cameras. Footage is clean, per Kramer's report. Alley doors locked, no signs of jimmying. If someone got in, they didn't use a crowbar or a welcome mat. Wolfe leaned back, his chair groaning like a tired mule. A puzzle with no edges. The note, the answer is 0, suggests purpose, not despair. We need more pieces. No argument there, I said. Kramer's sending the coroner's report Ascot tomorrow, and he'll talk about Quayle's laptop. Saul's on Vaughan's. Tale to verify his shadow story. What's next? Wolfe opened his eyes fully. A rare event. Summon Mr. Panzer, Mr. Durkin, and Mr. Cather. I wish to brief them. I raised an eyebrow. Wolfe doesn't call in the cavalry unless he smells blood. Saul Panzer, Fred Durkin, and Ori Cather are the best in the business, and their hourly rates could make a banker weep. I hit the phone. Saul was free and would be over by 7 p.m. Fred was tied up, but could make 8 p.m. Ori, probably charming a dame at some bar, swore he'd be here by 7:30, sober enough to listen. I relayed the schedule to Wolfe, who nodded and returned to Vaughan's. Papers, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the desk. Dinner was a Fritz Brenner masterpiece. Squab stuffed with wild rice, asparagus in hollandaise, and a pear tart that could have convinced a saint to sin. Wolfe ate in silence, his brain clearly elsewhere, while I kept the talk light. mostly praising Fritz's genius to keep the mood from souring. By 7:05, we were back in the office, coffee in hand, waiting for the crew. Saul Panzer slipped in first, quiet as a cat, his wiry frame and sharp nose making him look like a bloodhound in a suit. He nodded at me, took the yellow chair by Wolfe's desk, and waited, his eyes missing nothing. Ori Cather strutted in at 7:28, tall, handsome, with a grin that works better on women than on Wolfe. He claimed the red leather chair, looking smug. Fred Durkin lumbered in at 7:55, big as a bear, his honest face set in a frown. He took a chair near the globe, muttering about traffic. Wolfe surveyed them like a general sizing up his troops. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice a low rumble, "we are engaged in a matter of singular complexity. A murder deemed unsolvable by the police. Archie, summarize." I stood, because Wolfe likes theatrics. Dr. Elias Vaughn, Columbia math professor, hired us to solve the murder of his colleague, Dr. Leonard Quayle, killed March 22nd in a sealed research vault. Blunt force to the head, no weapon, no suspects, no way in or out. Police, led by Inspector Kramer, gave up after 2 weeks. Vaughn claims he's next. Says he's been followed and got a threatening note. 0 is coming. Matching 1 found. With Quayle, the answer is 0. Vault's a concrete box, 10 by 12, steel door, keypad lock, 6-inch air circulator, cameras showing Quayle alone. Janitor heard a hum when he found the body. That's the mess. Wolfe leaned forward, a 1/4 ton of genius in motion. This case hinges on an apparent impossibility. Our task is to make the impossible possible. Mr. Panzer, investigate Quayle's academic rivals, Dr. Margaret Hensley, Dr. Simon Tate, and Paul Rourke, a graduate student. Motives, alibis, movements on March 22nd. Mr. Durkin, examine the mathematics building security system, cameras, locks, access logs. Mr. Cather, locate Quayle's laptop, likely in police custody, and ascertain its contents. Archie, coordinate and pursue anomalies. Saul nodded, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Hensley, Tate, Rourke. Any specifics on their grudges? Per Vaughn, I said. Hensley lost a grant thanks to Quayle's bad-mouthing. Tate blames him for a tenure block. Rourke says Quayle stole his thesis. All had reason to hate him, but alibis are tight. Fred scratched his jaw. Security's tricky. Need blueprints, maybe a tech guy. Police already swept it. Then, sweep again, Wolfe snapped. The police are not infallible. Ori smirked. Laptops probably at homicide. I know a guy in evidence. Might take a bribe. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. No illegality, Mr. Cather. Persuasion, not corruption, Ori. Shrugged, unfazed. I caught Saul's eye. He'd keep Ori in line. The briefing wrapped by 8:30, and the trio left, each with a mission and a chunk of Wolfe's retainer. I poured another coffee, feeling the case's weight settle in. Think they'll find anything? I asked, sitting. Wolfe sipped his beer. They will find what exists. The question is whether it suffices. I snorted. That's helpful. Any theories on the hum? Speculation without data is folly, he said, which meant he had a theory but wasn't sharing. Call Inspector Kramer. Request a meeting tomorrow, 11 a.m. Bring the coroner's report. I dialed homicide. Kramer was out, but I left a leadership message with a desk sergeant emphasizing Wolfe's involvement to light a fire. Kramer hates Wolfe's meddling, but he knows better than to ignore him. I hung up and turned to Wolfe, who was back to Vaughan's papers, his lips pursed. "Vaughan's notes," he said, "suggest Quayle was nearing a breakthrough on their conjecture. The note, the answer is 0, may be mathematical, not metaphorical. I require Quayle's research." "Great," I said. "I'll just pop over to the vault and grab his ghost's notebook." Wolfe ignored me, which was par for the course. I spent the next hour typing up the briefing notes, then called Saul for a quick check-in. He was already digging into Hensley's financials. Smart, since money's a motive that never goes out of style. By 10 p.m., I was ready to call it a night, but Wolfe had other ideas. "Archie," he said, not looking up. "Tomorrow, revisit the vault. Bring a tape measure and a flashlight. Examine the air circulator closely." I groaned. I already checked it. 6 inches sealed. No way through. "Then check again," he said, his tone final. "Precision, not at assumption." I knew better than to argue. Wolfe's hunches are like bloodhounds. They don't always bark, but they usually find something. I jotted down the task, wondering if the hum was the key or just a red herring. The vault, the note, the shadow on Vaughan's tail. This case was like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half from a different box. As I headed to bed, I glanced at Wolfe, still buried in equations. His brain was running at full tilt, and I had a feeling he was already seeing patterns I couldn't. That's the thing about working for a genius. Half the time you're playing catch-up, and the other half you're just hoping he's right. I turned off the light, leaving him to his beer and his brain, and hoped tomorrow would bring something, anything, to crack this so-called unsolvable case. The next morning, I was up at 7:30, fueled by Fritz's pancakes and a double espresso. I grabbed a tape measure, a flashlight and my notebook, then caught a cab to Columbia. The mathematics building was waking up, students shuffling like zombies to early classes. I nodded at Mike, the Bassett-faced security guard, and got access to the vault. The concrete box hadn't changed overnight. No surprise there. I measured the walls, exactly 10 feet by 12. The door, 3 inches thick, steel keypad pristine, and the air circulator, 6 inches square, screws tight. I shone the flashlight into the grate, seeing nothing but dust and a faint glint of metal. Probably the fan blades. I tapped the ceiling around it, listening for hollow spots. Solid as a rock. I even climbed on the desk to get a closer look, nearly breaking my neck when the chair wobbled. Nothing. If the hum came from here, it wasn't leaving a calling card. I checked the desk again, running my hands under the edges for hidden compartments. Zilch. The floor was seamless concrete, no trapdoors. I measured the distance from the desk to the door, 8 feet, the height of the ceiling, 9 feet, and even the chair's weight, about 15 pounds, too light to be a weapon. By 9:30, I was sweaty, annoyed, and empty-handed. Wolfe's precision was starting to feel like punishment. Back at the brownstone by 10:45, I found Wolfe in the office, a fresh beer in hand, reading a book on number theory he'd pulled from the shelves. I reported my measurements, emphasizing the big fat nothing I'd found. He listened, his face unreadable, then nodded. "Satisfactory," he said, which was as close to praise as I'd get. "Prepare for Mr. Kramer's arrival." I set out the coroner's report, which had arrived by messenger, and poured myself a coffee, wondering if Kramer would bring answers or just his usual bluster. The vault was a locked box, the hum was a ghost, and Vaughan's shadow was still just a shadow. But Wolfe's eyes had that glint, the one that meant he was already steps ahead. I just hoped I could keep up. Chapter 4. Orchids and Obstacles. It was Thursday morning, April 18th, and I was in the office, trying to make sense of the coroner's report on Dr. Leonard Quayle's death, while the smell of Fritz's bacon wafted from the kitchen. The report was as helpful as a blank crossword. Blunt force trauma to the occipital bone, instantaneous death, no foreign particles in the wound, no weapon found. The vault's mystery was still a locked box, and my trip to Columbia yesterday had yielded nothing but precise measurements and a bruised ego from nearly falling off a chair. Nero Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, fussing over his orchids, which meant I had until 11 a.m. to prepare for Inspector Kramer's visit and Dr. Elias Vaughan's return. Vaughan had called at 8:30, sounding like a man who'd seen his own ghost. He'd be here at 11 with more documents, and he swore his shadow, the tall figure in the dark coat and hat, was still dogging him. Saul Panzer, tailing Vaughan since yesterday, hadn't spotted anyone suspicious yet. But Saul's the best, so if there was a shadow, he'd find it. I typed up a memo for Wolfe, summarizing the coroner's report and Vaughan's call, and sent it to the plant rooms via the house line. Then I poured another coffee and tried to think like a killer who could walk through walls. At 10:55 the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, all 1/7 of a ton, in a grey suit with a yellow orchid, Phalaenopsis probably, in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the flower, and fixed me with a look that said he expected miracles. I gave him the memo, which he skimmed, then set aside. "Archie," he said, "report on Mr. Panzer's progress." "Saul's on Vaughan like a tick," I said. "No sign of the shadow yet. Tall guy, dark coat, hat. Vaughan's jumpy, cancelling. Classes, sticking to crowded streets. Saul's also digging into the suspects. Margaret Hensley, Simon Tate, Paul Rourke. Hensley's broke since losing that grant. Tate's bitter about tenure. Rourke's thesis is a near match for Quayle's last paper. Motives aplenty, but no proof." Wolfe grunted, a sound that meant he was listening but not impressed. The coroner's report? Blunt force back of the head. No weapon, no residue. Quayle died fast, probably didn't see it coming. Vault was clean, no blood splatter, no fibres, just his papers, and that note. The answer is 0. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. A sterile crime scene. Unusual. The hum reported. "By the janitor, your thoughts?" I shrugged. Could be the air circulator, could be something else. I checked the grate, 6 inches, sealed. No way it's a murder weapon. Maybe a machine was running nearby, but Charlie said the basement was quiet. "Speculation," Wolfe said, his tone sharp. "We need facts. Mr. Kramer's visit. Scheduled for 11. He's bringing details on Quayle's laptop. Maybe more on the vault. He's not happy. But when is he?" Wolfe's lips twitched, almost a smile. Inspector Kramer's displeasure is a constant, like gravity. Prepare. The office. I straightened the desk, set out notepads, and poured water for Kramer, who'd refuse it just to be contrary. At 11:02, the doorbell rang. I checked the one-way glass and saw Vaughan, looking like he'd aged a decade since yesterday. His hair was a grey tangle, his tie a lost cause, and his satchel sagged like it held the weight of his fears. Behind him, surprisingly, was Inspector Kramer, his bulldog face set in a scowl, a manila folder under his arm. I opened the door. "Gentlemen, welcome to the circus," Kramer snorted. "Save it, Goodwin. Where's Wolfe?" Vaughn just nodded, his eyes darting like a hunted deer's. I led them to the office, where Vaughn took the red leather chair, and Kramer claimed a yellow one, dropping the folder on Wolfe's desk like it was a gauntlet. Wolfe eyed the folder, then Kramer, then Vaughn, his expression unreadable. "Inspector," Wolfe said, "you are punctual. Dr. Vaughn, you are not. Explain." Vaughn flinched. I was delayed. The shadow again, outside my apartment. I took a detour." Kramer rolled his eyes. "This shadow nonsense. We checked your first note, Vaughn. No prints, no leads. Probably a student prank." "It's no prank," Vaughn snapped, his voice cracking. "I'm being watched. I know it." Wolfe raised a hand, silencing them. "Inspector, your report on the laptop." Kramer opened the folder, his cigar twitching in his mouth, unlit because Wolfe forbids smoking. Quayle's laptop's in evidence. Forensics found nothing. No unusual files, just math papers, emails, standard stuff. Password protected, but he'd left it logged in. No fingerprints but his. We're holding it, but there's nothing to hold on to. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Emails. With whom? Colleagues, mostly. Hensley, Tate, a few others. Some heated exchanges, but nothing criminal. Vaughn's name came up. Quayle called. Him a parasite in one. Vaughn reddened. He was the parasite stealing my work. Enough, Wolfe said. Inspector, the vault security footage. Clean, Kramer said. Quayle enters at 8 p.m., alone. Door stays shut until the janitor, 7 a.m. Cameras are tamper-proof, checked by our techs. No one's invisible. Wolfe, not even your genius. I hid a grin. Kramer's sarcasm is an art form, but Wolfe's hide is thicker than a rhino's. Wolfe turned to Vaughn. Your documents. Present them. Vaughn fumbled with his satchel, pulling out a stack of papers, notebooks, printouts, and a USB drive. These are Quayle's notes, my notes, our correspondence. The conjecture we were working on, it's all here. I thought it might help. Wolfe took the stack, glancing at a page of equations that looked like hieroglyphs to me. Your rivalry with Quayle. Detail it fully. Vaughn adjusted his glasses, which were sliding again. It started 2 years ago. We were both chasing a proof for a prime number conjecture, potentially worth millions in cryptography. We shared ideas, but Quayle published a preliminary result last year, claiming sole credit. I confronted him, we argued, and he cut me out. I kept working, but he was ahead, or so he thought. Did he threaten you? Wolfe asked. Not physically. He mocked me, said I'd never match him. But he was paranoid, thought someone was stealing his work. Maybe that's why he used the vault. Wolfe grunted, filing that away. The note. The answer is 0. Your interpretation? Vaughn hesitated. It could be mathematical. 0 is significant in our field. Solutions to equations, null results. But Quayle wasn't suicidal. It's a message, or a taunt. Kramer snorted. Or he was nuts. We're done chasing ghosts, Wolfe. The case is closed. Wolfe ignored him, turning to me. Archie, your observations from the vault. I repeated the measurements, 10 by 12 feet, 9-foot ceiling, 6-inch circulator, solid concrete. No seams, no hollow spots, no way in or out. The hum's the only oddity, and it's a stretch. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. Kramer shifted, impatient, but knew better than to interrupt. Vaughn clutched his satchel, looking like he wanted to bolt. After a minute, Wolfe opened his eyes. "Inspector," he said, "I require access to the vault, with Archie present tomorrow. At 10 a.m. also, the janitor's full statement." Kramer's cigar twitched. "You're fishing, Wolfe. The vault's a dead end." "Then humour me," Wolfe said, his tone icy. "Dr. Vaughn, you will return tomorrow at 11 a.m. Bring any additional correspondence with Quayle, no matter how trivial." Vaughn nodded, his hands trembling. Kramer stood, grabbing his folder. "I'll arrange it, but don't expect miracles. You're wasting your time." He stormed out, the front door slamming behind him. I escorted Vaughn to the stoop, where he paused, scanning the street. "Mr. Goodwin, do you think Wolfe can solve this?" "If anyone can, it's him," I said, "but keep your eyes open. If that shadow's real, don't play hero." He nodded and shuffled off, looking like a man headed for the gallows. Chirbico. In the office, Wolfe was deep in Vaughn's notes, a fresh beer in hand. I sat, feeling the case's weight like a bad hangover. "Comments?" I said, hoping for a crumb. "A pattern emerges," Wolfe said, "but it is incomplete. The hum, the note, the rivalry, all threads in a tapestry. We need the loom." I groaned. "Can you skip the metaphors and give me something solid?" Ignored me, which was par for the course. "Archie, call Mr. Panzer. Instruct him to focus on Paul Rourke's thesis. Compare it to Quayle's publications." I dialed Saul, who was staking out Hensley's apartment. He took the order, promising to dig into Rourke's work by morning. I hung up, staring at the stack of equations on Wolfe's desk. "You think the murder's about math?" "Everything is about something," Wolfe said, which was as helpful as a blank map. "Lunch is at 1. Fritz is preparing shad roe. Do not be late." I spent the next hour typing up Kramer's visit and Vaughn's latest spiel, my fingers itching to crack the case, or at least a knuckle. The vault was a fortress, the hum a whisper, and Vaughn's shadow a maybe. Wolfe's brain was churning, but I was stuck playing errand boy, chasing measurements and ghosts. As I filed the notes, I glanced at Wolfe, his eyes locked on a page of numbers, the orchid in his lapel glowing under the desk lamp. He was in his element, and I was in the dark, but that's the deal when you work for a genius. You just hope the light comes soon. Chapter 5. Kramer's Conundrum. It was Friday morning, April 19th, and I was in the office, nursing a coffee and trying to make sense of the case that was starting to feel like a bad dream you can't wake up from. The locked vault, where Dr. Leonard, Quayle met his maker, was as impenetrable as ever. Dr. Elias Vaughn was seeing shadows around every corner, and Nero Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably sweet-talking his orchids while I wrestled with a stack of notes that made about as much sense as a calculus textbook. Inspector Kramer was due at 11 a.m. to discuss the Quayle case, and I had a feeling he'd bring more attitude than answers. I'd spent the previous evening on the phone with Saul Panzer, who was still tailing Vaughn and digging into the academic suspects, Margaret Hensley, Simon Tate, and Paul Rourke. Saul hadn't spotted Vaughan's mysterious shadow yet, but he'd found a juicy tidbit. Rourke's thesis, which Quayle allegedly plagiarized, was nearly identical to Quayle's last published paper, down to the equations. That was motive enough to crack a skull. But Rourke had an alibi, teaching a late seminar the night of the murder, confirmed by 10 students. Hensley and Tate were also accounted for, though Saul was double-checking their stories. Fred Durkin was poking at the math building's security, and Ori Cather was schmoozing a contact in homicide to get a peek at Quayle's laptop. So far, we had a lot of smoke, but no fire. The coroner's report, which Kramer had sent yesterday, was a dead end. Blunt force to the back of Quayle's head, instantaneous death, no weapon, no residue, no nothing. The note in Quayle's hand, the answer is 0, was still our only clue. Unless you counted Vaughan's threatening note, 0 is coming, which Kramer dismissed as a prank. The janitor's mention of a faint hum when he found the body nagged at me. But my second trip to the vault yesterday had turned up nothing but dust and a sore neck from staring at a 6-inch air circulator. At 10:50, I typed up a summary for Wolfe, sent it to the plant rooms, and straightened the office. For Kramer's visit, I set out water, which he'd ignore, and a notepad for myself, because Wolfe expects me to catch every grunt and growl. The elevator hummed at 10:58, and Wolfe entered, all 400 pounds of him, in a brown suit with a yellow phalaenopsis in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a look that said he was expecting progress I didn't have. "Archie," he said, "report on Mr. Panzer's findings." I flipped open my notebook. Saul's still on Vaughan. No shadow yet. He's checking the suspects. Rourke's thesis matches Quayle's paper, giving him a motive, but his alibi's solid, teaching till 10 p.m. Hensley was at a conference in Boston the night of the murder, verified by hotel records. Tate was home with his wife, who swears he never left. Fred's digging into the building's cameras and locks. Nothing yet. Ori's working on the laptop, says it's still in evidence, but he's got a lead. Wolfe grunted, which meant he was listening, but not thrilled. The vault inspection. Same as yesterday, I said. 10 by 12, concrete walls, steel door, keypad lock, 6-inch circulator, sealed tight. Measured everything. 9-foot ceiling, 8 feet from desk to door. No seams, no hollow spots, no secret passages. The hum's a ghost, unless Charlie's hearing things. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking like an old ship. The hum persists in relevance. The note, the answer is 0. Any theories? Vaughan says it could be mathematical, something about null results in their conjecture. I say it's a taunt, but I'm no Einstein. Indeed, Wolfe said, his tone dry. Prepare for Mr. Kramer. I was setting out the coroner's report when the doorbell rang at 11:03. I checked the one-way glass and saw Kramer, his bulldog face redder than usual, a manila folder under one arm and a cigar in his mouth, unlit because he knows Wolfe's rules. I opened the door. "Morning, Inspector," I said. "Ready to solve the unsolvable." "Stuff it, Goodwin," he growled, brushing past me. "This is a waste of my time." I led him to the office, where he took the red leather chair, tossing the folder on Wolfe's desk like it was a grenade. Wolfe eyed it, then Kramer, his expression as welcoming as a winter storm. "Inspector," Wolfe said, "you are prompt. Your report?" Kramer chomped his cigar, his eyes hard. "You're meddling, Wolfe. The Quayle case is closed. Unsolvable. No leads, no suspects. You're stirring up trouble for nothing." Wolfe's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Trouble is my profession, Inspector. The laptop." Kramer opened the folder, his fingers thick as sausages. Still in evidence. Forensics went through it. Math files, emails, nothing suspicious. Quayle was arguing with half the department, including Van, but it's academic nonsense, not murder. No unusual activity, no deleted files, just equations and ego. "Emails with whom?" Wolfe asked. "Hensley, Tate, Van, a few others." Quayle called Van a leech, Hensley a fraud, Tate a has-been. The guy was a jerk, but that's not evidence. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. A rare move. "The vault's security footage. You've reviewed it personally." Kramer's scowl deepened. "Yeah, I watched it. Quayle enters at 8 p.m. alone. Door stays shut until the janitor, 7 a.m. Cameras are clean, tamper-proof, checked by our best techs. No one's a magician, not even you." I hid a grin. Kramer's never forgiven Wolfe for making him look like a rookie, and this case was poking that sore spot. Wolfe ignored the jab, turning to the folder. "The janitor's statement?" Kramer slid a page across the desk. "Charlie Russo, 62, night janitor. Opened the vault at 7 a.m. Found Quayle dead, blood on his head. Heard a faint hum. Thought it was the air circulator. Called security. Didn't touch anything. He's clean. Been with the university 20 years. No record." Wolfe skimmed the statement, his eyes narrowing. "The hum. Did he describe its quality?" "Faint, like a motor, stopped fast," Kramer said. "We checked the circulator. 6 inches, sealed, no tampering. It's nothing, Wolfe. You're chasing shadows." "Shadows are often substantial," Wolfe said, his voice low. "I require access to the vault with Archie this afternoon at 2 p.m. Kramer's cigar twitched. "You're kidding! We swept that place clean. What do you expect to find?" "Clarity," Wolfe said, which was as vague as a politician's promise. "Also, the laptop. I wish to examine it." Kramer stood, his chair scraping. "The laptop's evidence. You want it? Get a court order. I'm not your errand boy." Wolfe's eyes glinted, a sign he was enjoying this. "Very well, Inspector. Expect a call from my attorney, Nathaniel Parker. Meanwhile, the vault access?" Kramer muttered something unprintable, then nodded. "Fine, 2 p.m., but it's a waste. Don't mess with the scene." He stormed out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. I turned to Wolfe, who was already back to Van's papers, a fresh beer in hand. "You sure know how to charm him." "Charm is irrelevant," Wolfe said. "Facts are paramount. Call Mr. Panzer. Instruct him to intensify surveillance on Paul Rourke." I dialed Saul, who was staking out Rourke's apartment. He confirmed Rourke's alibi, but said the kid was nervous, meeting with a shady lawyer known for intellectual property cases. I relayed Wolfe's order, and Saul promised to stick to Rourke. Like glue. I hung up, feeling the case's weight like a bad hangover. "Any theories?" I asked, hoping for a crumb. Wolfe grunted, which meant I'd get nothing yet. "The hum is a thread. The note is a knot. We must unravel both." I groaned. "Can you skip the poetry and give me something to work with?" He ignored me, flipping a page of equations. "Archie, prepare for the vault inspection. Bring a stethoscope, a flashlight, and a notepad. Focus on the air circulator." "A stethoscope?" I said. "What am I, a doctor?" "Precision, not sarcasm," Wolfe said, his tone final. "Lunch is at 1. Fritz is preparing chaudreau with beurre noir. Be prompt." I spent the next hour typing up Kramer's visit, my fingers itching to punch something, preferably the vault's door. At 12:55, Vaughn called, saying he was delayed but would be here by 3 p.m. with more of Quayle's notes. He sounded shakier than ever, claiming his shadow was back, this time near campus. I told him to stick to crowds and called Saul, who was still on Rourke, but promised to check Vaughn's route later. Lunch was a Fritz masterpiece. Chaudreau, creamed potatoes, and a lemon soufflé that could have made a jury acquit. Wolfe ate in silence, his brain clearly elsewhere, while I kept the talk light, mostly about the Yankees to avoid brooding. By 1:45, I was in a cab to Columbia, stethoscope, flashlight, and notepad in my bag, feeling like a quack on a wild goose chase. The mathematics building was busier today, students buzzing like bees. Kramer had left word with security, and Mike, the basset-faced guard, let me into the vault. The concrete box was as stubborn as ever. 10 by 12, 9-foot ceiling, steel door, 6-inch circulator. I shone the flashlight into the grate, seeing only dust and metal. I pressed the stethoscope to the ceiling around it, listening for anything. A hum, a click, a gremlin. Nothing but silence. I tapped the walls again, checked the desk's underside, even measured the door's thickness. 3 inches, as expected. By 2:45, I was sweaty, annoyed, and empty-handed. Back at the brownstone by 3:10, I found Vaughn in the office, looking like he'd run from a horror movie. His satchel was open, papers spilling out, and Wolfe was grilling him on Quayle's enemies. I reported the vault inspection, emphasizing the big fat 0 I'd found. "Satisfactory," Wolfe said, which was as close to praise as I'd get. "Dr. Vaughn, your additional notes." Vaughn handed over a notebook, his hands shaking. "Quayle's last journal. I found it in his office, hidden in a drawer. It's dense, but it mentions the conjecture and a breakthrough he was hiding." Wolfe took the journal, his eyes glinting. "A breakthrough? Interesting? You will remain for dinner, Dr. Vaughn." Vaughn paled. "Dinner? I should get back." "You will stay," Wolfe said, his tone closing the matter. "Fritz is preparing squab. Archie, call Mr. Durkin. Inquire about the security system." I dialed Fred, who was still poking at the cameras. He'd found a glitch, a 10-second gap in the alley camera's footage from March 21st, the day before the murder. It wasn't much, but it was something. I relayed it to Wolfe, who nodded, his fingers drumming on the journal. As Vaughn fidgeted and Wolfe read, I leaned back, staring at the note on the desk. 0 is coming. The vault, the hum, the shadow, the glitch. This case was a maze with no exit. But Wolfe's brain was a machine, and I could almost hear it humming, louder than anything Charlie heard. I just hoped it would lead us somewhere before Vaughn's shadow made good on its threat. Chapter 6. The Academic Suspects. It was Saturday, April 20th, and I was starting to think the Quayle case was a puzzle designed by a sadist with a grudge against detectives. The locked vault where Dr. Leonard Quayle had been bashed into eternity was still a sealed mystery. Dr. Elias Vaughn was jumping at shadows, and Nero Wolfe was acting like he'd already solved the thing, but wasn't ready to share. I was in the office at 9 a.m., sipping Fritz's coffee and reviewing my notes. which were beginning to look like the ravings of a conspiracy theorist. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably whispering to his orchids, leaving me to plan my day's legwork, interviewing the 3 academic suspects Van had named: Dr. Margaret Hensley, Dr. Simon Tate, and Paul Rourke. Saul Panzer had sent a report last night, confirming the suspects' alibis, but digging up dirt that made them worth a closer look. Hensley, who'd lost a grant thanks to Quayle's sabotage, was drowning in debt and had been seen arguing with him a week before his death. Tate, denied tenure because of Quayle's influence, had a temper and a history of bar fights. Rourke, the grad student whose thesis Quayle allegedly stole, was suing the university, egged on by a shady lawyer. All had motives, but their alibis, Hensley at a Boston conference, Tate at home with his wife, Rourke teaching a seminar, were tighter than Wolfe's vest. Fred Durkin had found a 10-second gap in the math building's alley camera the day before the murder, which was intriguing but not exactly a smoking gun. Ori Cather was still working his contact to get a peek at Quayle's laptop, with no luck yet. The coroner's report was a dead end. The janitor's hum was a ghost, and Vaughn's shadow, tall dark coat, hat, was still unconfirmed, though Saul was on his tail. Wolfe was obsessed with Quayle's note, "The answer is 0. And Vaughn's matching threat, 0 is coming. But he wasn't sharing his theories, which was par for the course. My job was to shake the suspect's trees and see what fell out, so I grabbed my hat, notebook, and a fresh pencil, ready to hit Columbia. Before I could leave, the phone rang. It was Vaughan, his voice high and shaky, like a violin string about to snap. "Mr. Goodwin, I saw the shadow again, outside my apartment, 7 a.m. I'm at a cafe now, too scared to go home." "Same guy?" I asked, jotting it down. "Tall? Coat, hat?" "Yes, exactly. I called the police, but they laughed it off. Please, tell Mr. Wolfe I need protection." "Stay in public," I said. "I'll tell Saul to stick closer. Be at the brownstone by 6 p.m. with any new info on Quayle." He agreed, sounding like he'd rather hide under a rock. I called Saul, who was staking out Rourke's apartment, and told him to tighten the net on Vaughan. Saul promised to check the cafe and keep eyes on both. I hung up, scribbled a note for Wolfe. Vaughan saw Shadow again, wants protection, meeting at 6, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I caught a cab to Columbia, my head buzzing with questions, and not a single answer. The mathematics building was a grey stone maze, buzzing with students who looked like they hadn't slept since midterms. I'd arranged to meet the suspects through the department chair, who'd grumbled but complied when I mentioned Wolfe's name. First up was Dr. Margaret Hensley, a wiry woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a handshake like a vice. We met in her office, a cluttered cave of books and papers, with a photo of her at a conference pinned to a corkboard. "Dr. Hensley," I said, settling into a chair. "I'm Archie Goodwin, working for Nero Wolfe. We're looking into Leonard, Quayle's death. You knew him well." Her lips tightened. "Too well. Leonard was brilliant but ruthless. He cost me a $200,000 grant by slandering my work to the funding board. Said my methodology was sloppy. I was furious, but I didn't kill him." "Where were you March 22nd, 8 p.m.? I asked, pencil ready. "Boston, at a number theory conference. I gave a talk at 7 p.m., networked until 10. Hotel records and colleagues confirm it. I nodded, noting her steady gaze. You argued with Quayle a week before he died. What about? He was poaching my research assistants, offering them co-authorship he'd never deliver. I called him out in the faculty lounge. He laughed it off, said I was hysterical. I wanted to strangle him, but I didn't. Anyone else who'd want him dead. She snorted. Half the department. Simon Tate despised him for blocking his tenure. Paul Rourke was livid about his thesis. Even Elias Varn had reasons, though he's too spineless to act. I thanked her and moved on. Her alibi solid, but her anger real. Next was Dr. Simon Tate, a lanky man in his 40s with a beard that looked like it was staging a protest. His office was sparse, with a boxing glove on a shelf hinting at his bar fight past. He leaned back in his chair, eyeing me like I was a student late with an assignment. Mr. Goodwin, he said, I heard you're digging up Leonard's dirt. Good luck. He was a snake. Sounds personal, I said. Care to elaborate? Leonard torpedoed my tenure bid 2 years ago, said my work was derivative. I'm stuck as an associate professor, scraping by. I hated him, but I was home with my wife Carla the night he died. She'll vouch for me. I scribbled that down. Any run-ins with Quayle lately? A month ago, I caught him bad-mouthing me to a visiting scholar. I told him to shut his trap, or I'd shut it. For him, he smirked and walked away. If I was going to kill him, I'd have used my fists, not a locked vault. Know anyone who could have pulled it off? He shrugged. Leonard had enemies. Rourke's a hothead. Thinks Leonard stole his thesis. Hensley's desperate for cash. Varn's a weasel, always whining about Leonard's theft. But that vault, nobody could crack it. I thanked him, his alibi holding but his temper a red flag. Last was Paul Rourke, the grad student who met me in a campus coffee shop. He was 25, wiry, with a buzz cut and eyes that darted like a cornered rat. He sipped an espresso, his leg bouncing under the table. Mr. Goodwin, he said, I didn't kill Quayle, but I'm not crying over him. He stole my thesis, my work on prime numbers, and published it as his own. I'm suing the university, but it's a long shot. Where were you March 22nd, 8 p.m.? I asked. Teaching a seminar, 7 to 10 p.m. 10 students saw me. I went home after crashed. No way I was near that vault. I noted his fidgeting. You confronted Quayle about the thesis? Yeah, in his office, 2 weeks before he died. I called him a thief. He said I was a nobody who'd never prove it. I wanted to deck him, but I didn't. I'm not stupid. Anyone else with a grudge? Everybody. Hensley's broke. Tate's a loose cannon. Varn's obsessed with their stupid conjecture. But nobody could get into that vault. It's impossible. I thanked him, his alibi tight, but his nerves screaming guilt or fear. By 3 p.m., I was back in a cab, my notebook full but my head empty. The suspects had motives up to their ears, but their alibis were ironclad, and the vault was a fortress. I stopped at a deli for a pastrami sandwich, mulling over their stories. Hensley's calm rage, Tate's simmering violence, Rourke's twitchy defiance. Someone was hiding something, but I'd need a crowbar to pry it out. Back at the brownstone by 5:30, I found Wolfe in the office, a beer in hand, reading Quayle's journal from Varn's latest delivery. The orchid in his lapel was fresh, and his desk was a mess of equations. I reported the interviews, emphasizing the suspect's motives and alibis. Satisfactory, Wolfe said, which was as close to praise as I'd get. Their alibis are convenient, too convenient. Convenient doesn't mean false, I said. They can't all be lying. Perhaps not, Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. But truth is malleable. The hum, Archie, your thoughts? Still a ghost, I said. The circulators sealed, and I heard nothing with the stethoscope. Maybe Charlie's ears were playing tricks. Or perhaps not, Wolfe said, flipping a page. Quayle's journal mentions a sonic anomaly in his experiments. Intriguing. Sonic, I said, like sound waves. He ignored me, which meant I'd hit something but wouldn't get more. The doorbell rang at 6:05, and I let Vaan in, who looked like he'd been chased by a pack of wolves. His satchel was clutched, tight, and his glasses were fogged with sweat. "Mr. Wolfe," he gasped, dropping into the red leather chair. I saw the shadow again near the cafe. I'm not imagining it. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. Describe this sighting. Tall, dark coat, hat, just like before. They were across the street watching. I ran into a bookstore, stayed an hour, then came here. I called Saul, who was nearby, and told him to check the bookstore's area. He'd see no one matching the description, but would dig deeper. I hung up, turning to Vaan. You're safe here. Got anything new on Quayle? Vaan pulled a USB drive from his satchel. His last emails, from a backup I found. They're encrypted, but I'll decode them tonight. He was paranoid, talking about a threat to his work. Wolfe took the drive, his eyes narrowing. A threat? From whom? He didn't say, Vaan said, but he mentioned 0 repeatedly like it was a code. Wolfe grunted, filing that away. You will stay for dinner, Dr. Vaan. Fritz is preparing roast pheasant. Vaan paled. I should get back. You will stay, Wolfe said, his tone final. Archie, call Mr. Durkin. Inquire about the camera glitch. I dialed Fred, who confirmed the 10-second gap in the alley camera on March 21st. He'd traced it to a power flicker, possibly intentional, but had no proof. I relayed it to Wolfe, who nodded, his fingers drumming on the journal. Dinner is at 7, Wolfe said. Archie, prepare a summary of today's interviews for Mr. Panzer. I spent the next hour typing, my fingers itching to crack the case, or at least a knuckle. Dinner was a Fritz triumph. Pheasant, wild rice, and a chocolate torte that could have made a judge weep. Vaan ate like a man expecting poison, while Wolfe savoured each bite, his brain clearly elsewhere. By 9 p.m., Vaan was gone, escorted by Saul, and I was back in the office, staring at Quayle's note. The answer is 0. Any theories? I asked Wolfe, who was sipping a fresh beer. A pattern forms, he said, but it is fragile. The hum, the note, the glitch, all threads. We need the needle, I groaned. Can you skip the riddles and give me something solid? He ignored me, returning to the journal. The vault, the shadow, the suspects. This case was a knot I couldn't untie. But Wolfe's eyes had that glint, the one that meant he was already steps ahead. I just hoped I could keep up before Vaan's shadow made its move. Chapter 7. A mathematical diversion. It was Sunday, April 21st, and I was starting to think the Quayle case was a riddle wrapped in a locked vault, with the key tossed into a black hole. The concrete bunker where Dr. Leonard Quayle had taken his final bow was still a mystery, tighter than Wolfe's vest. Dr. Elias Vaughn was seeing his shadow everywhere. And Nero Wolfe was acting like he had the answer, but was waiting for the stars to align before sharing. I was in the office at 8:30 a.m., sipping Fritz's coffee and trying to make sense of my notes, which were beginning to look like the scribbles of a madman. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably debating philosophy with his phalaenopsis, leaving me to wrestle with a case that was all questions and no answers. Yesterday's interviews with the academic suspects, Dr. Margaret Hensley, Dr. Simon Tate and Paul Rourke, had given me plenty of motives but no cracks in their alibis. Hensley was broke and bitter, Tate was a powder keg, and Rourke was a nervous wreck. But they were all accounted for the night Quayle died. Saul Panzer was still tailing Vaughn, who'd reported another shadow sighting, though Saul hadn't spotted the tall figure in the dark coat and hat. Fred Durkin had confirmed a 10-second gap in the Math Building's alley camera on March 21st. A possible clue, but it was thin as tissue paper. Ori Cather was hitting a wall with Quayle's laptop, still locked in homicide's evidence room. The coroner's report was useless. The janitor's hum was a phantom, and Quayle's note, "The answer is 0, was starting to haunt my dreams. The phone rang at 9:15, jarring me from my gloom. It was Saul, his voice calm but urgent. "Archie, Vaughn's at his apartment, says he saw the shadow again at 7 a.m. outside his building. I checked, no one matching the description, but he's rattled. I'm sticking close. Also, Rourke's meeting that lawyer again today. Smells like trouble. Keep on both," I said. "Vaughn's due here at 6 p.m. Any dirt on the suspects?" "Hensley's got a loan shark breathing down her neck," Saul said. "Tate's been emailing a rival university, fishing for a job. Rourke's lawsuits funded by someone anonymous, big money. I'm digging." I thanked him, scribbled a note for Wolfe. Vaughn saw shadow, Saul on it, suspects updates, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I reviewed Quayle's journal, which Vaughn had delivered yesterday. It was dense with equations, but Wolfe had flagged a mention of a sonic anomaly in Quayle's experiments, hinting at sound waves tied to his prime number conjecture. I didn't know what it meant, but Wolfe's interest made it a thread worth pulling. At 10:55 the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, a quarter-ton of genius in a grey suit with a yellow orchid in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the flower, and fixed me with a stare that demanded results I didn't have. "Archie," he said, "report." I flipped open my notebook. Saul's on Vaughn, who saw the shadow again. Tall coat, hat, no confirmation. Saul's digging on the suspects. Hensley's in debt. Tate's job hunting. Rourke's lawsuits backed by mystery cash. Fred's camera glitches a power flicker, maybe sabotage, no proof. Ori's stalled on the laptop. Vaughn's bringing more emails at 6. Wolfe grunted, which meant he was listening but not dazzled. "The journal?" Quayle mentions a sonic anomaly. "In his work," I said. "Could tie to the hum Charlie heard, but it's Greek to me. You think it's math or murder?" Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking like a ship in a storm. "Both. Quayle's conjecture, if proven, could disrupt cryptography. Billions in commercial value. The note, 'The answer is 0, may denote a breakthrough, not a taunt. The murder is likely a theft of intellect.'" I blinked. "You're saying someone killed Quayle for a math problem?" "Precisely," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. The vault was his sanctuary, the note his triumph. The killer sought his notes, not his life. "So, where's the weapon?" I said. "And how'd they get in?" "Questions for later," Wolfe said, which meant he had a theory but wasn't sharing. Archie, retrieve Quayle's remaining notes from his office. Dr. Varn mentioned a hidden drawer. "Search it," I groaned. "That's breaking and entering. The cops already swept his office." "Then sweep again," Wolfe said, his tone final. "Discretion, not bravado." I grabbed my hat, feeling like a cat burglar with a PI license. "If I get arrested, you're bailing me out." Wolfe ignored me, flipping open the journal. I caught a cab to Columbia, my stomach knotting at the thought of sneaking into a dead man's office. The mathematics building was quieter on a Sunday, with only a few students haunting the halls. I nodded at Mike, the Bassett-faced security guard, and spun a story about meeting a professor. He waved me through, too bored to care. Quayle's office was on the 3rd floor, a corner room with a locked door. I checked the hall, empty, then pulled out my lockpicks, a skill I'd learned from a less-than-savoury pal in my youth. The lock was standard, and I was inside in 30 seconds, closing the door behind me. The office was a shrine to chaos, books piled high, papers strewn across a desk, and a chalkboard covered in equations that looked like alien script. A photo of Quayle at a conference hung on the wall, his smirk as smug as ever. I started with the desk, checking drawers for Varns, or hidden one. The top drawers held pens, notepads, and a half-eaten granola bar. The bottom left was locked, which got my pulse up. I picked it, finding a slim notebook tucked behind a stack of folders. It was Quayle's, filled with more equations and cryptic notes about zero states and acoustic triggers. I slipped it into my jacket, my heart pounding like a drum. As I closed the drawer, I heard footsteps in the hall, slow, deliberate, stopping outside the door. I froze, my hand on the notebook. The knob rattled, and I ducked behind a bookshelf, praying the shadows would hide me. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped in. A janitor, not Charlie, but a younger guy with a mop and a suspicious squint. He scanned the room, his eyes lingering on the desk. I held my breath, cursing Wolfe for sending me on this fool's errand. The janitor muttered something, then left, closing the door. I waited a full minute, my knees aching, before slipping out. The hall was clear, but my nerves were shot. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nodded at Mike on my way out, and caught a cab back to the brownstone, the notebook burning a hole in my jacket. By 4 p.m., I was in the office, tossing the notebook on Wolfe's desk like it was a live grenade. He was sipping beer, his orchid still pristine, and he raised an eyebrow at my dishevelled state. "Trouble?" he said. "Only if you count nearly getting caught by a janitor," I snapped. Quayle's notebook from a locked drawer. Equations, zero states, acoustic triggers. Mean anything? Wolfe opened the notebook, his eyes scanning the pages. Possibly. Quayle was exploring sound waves as a computational tool. The hum may be no coincidence. I sat, my pulse still racing. Sound waves? You think the killer used a sonic death ray? Don't be absurd, Wolfe said, though his lips twitched. But sound is a force, Archie. A subtle one. I groaned, my head spinning. So, I risked jail for a theory about noise? For progress, Wolfe corrected, flipping a page. Call Mr. Panzer. Inquire about Vaughan's latest sighting. I dialed Saul, who was near Vaughan's cafe. He'd checked the bookstore from yesterday. No shadow, but a witness saw a tall man in a coat lingering nearby. Saul was now tailing Vaughan to the brownstone, due at 6. I relayed it to Wolfe, who nodded, his fingers drumming on the notebook. The doorbell rang at 6:05, and I let Vaughan in, who looked like he'd been running from a pack of wolves. His satchel was clutched tight, his glasses fogged, and his tie was a lost cause. "Mr. Wolfe," he gasped, dropping into the red leather chair. The shadow was closer today. I saw him near campus, watching from an alley. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. "Describe him." "Tall, dark coat, hat, same as always," Vaughan said. "I ran to a library, lost him, but I'm sure he's after me." I called Saul, who was outside, and told him to scout the block. He'd seen no one, but would circle back. I hung up, turning to Vaughan. "Got those emails?" Vaughan pulled a USB drive from his satchel. Decoded. Quayle was emailing a cryptographer in Zurich, talking about a zero breakthrough. He sounded scared, said someone was closing in. Wolfe took the drive, his eyes narrowing. "Closing in. Intriguing. You will stay for dinner, Dr. Vaughan." Vaughan paled. "I can't. I need to. You will stay," Wolfe said, his tone final. "Fritz is preparing roast lamb." I spent the next hour typing up the day's chaos, my fingers itching to punch something. Dinner was a Fritz masterpiece. Lamb, mashed parsnips, and a berry tart that could have made a jury sing. Vaughan ate like a condemned man, while Wolfe savoured each bite, his brain clearly elsewhere. By 8 p.m, Vaughan was gone, escorted by Saul, and I was back in the office, staring at Quayle's note. "The answer is 0. Any theories?" I asked Wolfe, who was sipping a fresh beer. "A tapestry forms," he said, "with sound as a thread. The note, the hum, the notes, all converge. We need the catalyst." I groaned. "Can you skip the riddles and give me a straight answer?" He ignored me, returning to the notebook. The vault, the shadow, the sonic anomaly. This case was a labyrinth, and I was lost. But Wolfe's eyes had that glint, the one that meant he was closing in. I just hoped I'd survive the chase. Chapter 8. The Trap is Set. It was Monday, April 22nd, and I was beginning to think the Quayle case was a jigsaw puzzle designed by a maniac with a grudge against logic. The sealed vault where Dr. Leonard Quayle had met his end was still a concrete enigma. Dr. Elias Vaughan was jumping at every shadow, and Nero Wolfe was acting like he'd cracked the code, but wasn't ready to show his cards. I was in the office at 8 a.m., nursing Fritz's coffee, and trying to make sense of a case that was starting to feel like chasing a ghost through a fog. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably debating the meaning of life with his orchids, leaving me to wrestle with a stack of notes that were more questions than answers. Yesterday's adventure in Quayle's office had left me with a stolen notebook full of cryptic terms like zero states and acoustic triggers, which Wolfe thought might tie to the janitor's mysterious hum. Saul Panzer was still tailing Vaughan, who'd reported yet another sighting of his shadowy stalker. Tall, dark coat, hat. But Saul hadn't spotted him. Fred Durkin's discovery of a 10-second camera glitch on March 21st was our only tangible clue, though it was thinner than a dime. Ori Cather was striking out on Quayle's laptop, still locked in Homicide's evidence room. The suspects, Dr. Margaret Hensley, Dr. Simon Tate and Paul Rourke, had motives up to their ears, but alibis tighter than a drum. And Quayle's, note, the answer is 0, was starting to feel like a taunt aimed at me personally. The phone rang at 8:45, snapping me out of my gloom. It was Saul, his voice steady as ever. "Archie, Vance at his apartment says he saw the shadow again at 7:30, outside his building. I swept the area, no one in a coat or hat, but he's a wreck. I'm sticking close. Also, Rourke's lawyer. Meeting was with a tech firm, sniffing around Quayle's conjecture. Big money involved." "Stay on Varn," I said. "Check Rourke's tech connection. Varn's due here at 6 p.m. Anything else?" "Hensley's loan shark's getting antsy," Saul said. "Tate's been calling a PI, maybe to dig dirt on Quayle posthumously. I'm on it." I thanked him, scribbled a note for Wolfe. Varn saw shadow, Saul negative, Rourke's tech link, suspects updates, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I reviewed Quayle's notebook, which Wolfe had been poring over like it held the secret to eternal life. His theory that the murder was about stealing Quayle's prime number conjecture, worth millions in cryptography, was starting to make sense, but it didn't explain the locked vault or the missing weapon. The sonic anomaly Quayle mentioned was a wild card, and I was itching to know if Wolfe was onto something or just blowing smoke. At 10:50, the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, all 1/7 of a ton in a brown suit with a yellow Miltonia in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that demanded progress I didn't have. "Archie," he said, "report." I flipped open my notebook. Saul's on Varn, who saw the shadow again. No. Confirmation. Rourke's lawyers meeting tech firms, sniffing Quayle's conjecture. Hensley's loan sharks circling. Tate's hired a PI. Fred's camera glitch is a power flicker, possibly sabotage, no proof. Ori's still stalled on the laptop. Varn's bringing more emails at 6. Wolfe grunted, which meant he was listening, but not impressed. "The notebook. Quayle's obsessed with 0 states and acoustic triggers," I said. "You think it's tied to the hum?" "Likely," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Sound is a force, Archie, invisible, but potent. Quayle's conjecture may involve computational sound waves, a breakthrough worth killing for." I leaned back, my head spinning. So, the killer used sound to bash Quayle's skull? That's science fiction. "Not fiction," Wolfe said, "but science beyond your grasp. The vault is the key. It's acoustics, it's isolation. We must provoke a reaction." "Provoke?" I said, sensing trouble. "How?" Wolfe leaned forward, a rare move that meant he was serious. "We will spread a rumour that I have solved the case, specifically that I know how the vault was breached. The killer, if vigilant, will act to protect their secret. You will plant this rumour at a faculty gathering tonight, hosted by the mathematics department." I groaned. "You want me to crash a nerd party and announce you're Sherlock Holmes? They'll laugh me out. Persuasion, not proclamation," Wolfe said, his tone sharp. "Dr. Varn will secure your invitation. Mingle, imply my breakthrough, observe reactions. The killer may betray themselves." I rubbed my temples, picturing a room full of eggheads and me playing spy. And if the killer takes the bait and comes after me. Mr. Panzer will shadow you, Wolfe said. Discretion, Archie, no heroics. I muttered something unprintable, but Wolfe was already back to the notebook, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm. I called Varn, who was at a campus library, and told him to get me into the faculty event, a mixer at 7 p.m. in the Math Building's lounge. He stammered but agreed, promising to meet me there. I called Saul, who was game to tail me, and Fred, who'd join as backup. Ori was still chasing the laptop, so I left him to it. By 6 p.m., Varn arrived at the brownstone, looking like he'd been chased by a thunderstorm. His satchel was stuffed, his glasses smudged, and his tie was a knot only a sailor could love. He handed Wolfe a USB drive, his hands shaking. "Quayle's last emails," he said. He was emailing a Zurich cryptographer about a zero breakthrough, saying it was dangerous. He was scared, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe took the drive, his eyes narrowing. Dangerous how? He didn't say, Varn said, but he mentioned interference, someone tampering with his work. Could it be the shadow? Possibly, Wolfe said, filing that away. You will attend the faculty event with Archie, ensure his entry, report any suspicious behaviour. Varn paled. The event, but the shadow, Mr. Panzer will watch you both, Wolfe said, his tone final. Dinner is at 7, but you will eat en route. Fritz has prepared sandwiches. I hid a grin. Wolfe's idea of fieldwork is a picnic, but I wasn't complaining. Varn nodded, looking like he'd rather face a firing squad. I grabbed the sandwiches, roast, beef on rye, Fritz's specialty, and we caught a cab to Columbia, Saul trailing in another car. The Math Building's lounge was on the second floor, a stuffy room with bad lighting and worse wine. Faculty and grad students milled about, talking equations and office politics, while a string quartet played something that sounded like a funeral for fun. Varn introduced me as a consultant, which got a few raised eyebrows, but no questions. I mingled, sipping sour Chardonnay and dropping hints about Wolfe's breakthrough. To Hensley, I said, Wolfe's got a theory on the vault, says it's not as sealed as everyone thinks. She frowned, her eyes sharp, but changed the subject to grant funding. To Tate I mentioned, Wolfe's cracked the Quayle case, something about acoustics. He snorted, called it nonsense, but his hand tightened on his glass. To Rourke, I whispered, Wolfe knows how Quayle was killed. Big news coming. Rourke's legs started bouncing, and he excused himself to the restroom. I worked the room for an hour, spreading the rumour like a virus. Most dismissed it as gossip, but I caught nervous glances. Hensley's quick look at Tate, Tate's glare at Rourke, Rourke's fidgeting near the exit. Varn stuck close, his eyes darting like hunted deers, whispering about a tall man he thought he saw outside. I told him to relax, knowing Saul and Fred were watching the perimeter. At 9 p.m., the party was winding down, and I was ready to call it a night. Then I noticed Tate slip out a side door, his face grim. I signalled Varn to stay put, and followed, keeping my distance. The hall was dim, leading to a stairwell. I heard footsteps below, then a door creak. I eased down the stairs, my hand on the .38 in my shoulder holster, just in case. The door led to the basement, near the vault. Tate was there, standing by the steel door, staring at it like it held the secret to his soul. "Hey, Doc," I said, stepping into view. "Late-night math?" He spun, his face pale. "Goodwin, I was just checking something. Old habit." "Checking the vault?" I said, keeping my tone light. "Heard Wolfe's onto something. Got you curious?" He laughed. "Too loud. Wolfe's full of it. That vault's a tomb. Nobody could crack it." "Maybe," I said, watching his hands. They were steady, but his eyes weren't. "Better get back to the party." He nodded, brushing past me, his shoulder tense. I waited until he was gone, then checked the vault. Door locked, keypad untouched. I headed back upstairs, my gut telling me Tate was rattled, but whether he was the killer or just spooked, I couldn't say. Vaughn was waiting, his face grey. "I saw the shadow," he whispered, "outside by the alley." I called Saul, who was patrolling the block. He'd seen no one matching the description, but found a cigarette butt in the alley, still warm. He bagged it for prints and promised to keep circling. I escorted Vaughn to a cab, telling him to stay at a hotel tonight, and caught another back to the brownstone, my head buzzing with Tate's reaction and Vaughn's panic. By 10:30, I was in the office reporting to Wolfe, who was sipping beer and reading Quayle's emails. I described the party, the rumours spread, and Tate's basement detour. "Tate's nervous," I said. "Could be guilt, could be fear." Hensley and Rourke twitched too, but Tate's the one who moved. "Satisfactory," Wolfe said, which was as close to praise as I'd get. "The killer is stirred. We must watch the ripples." "Ripples?" I said. "I nearly got caught in a dark basement, and Vaughn's seeing ghosts. Give me something solid." Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. "The vault's acoustics, Archie. Quayle's sonic anomaly suggests a sound-based mechanism. Perhaps a weapon, perhaps a tool. The hum is our beacon." I groaned. "A sound weapon? You're reading too many comic books." "Science, not fiction," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Call Mr. Panzer. Instruct him to focus on Tate's movements." I dialed Saul, who was back on Vaughn's hotel. I relayed Wolfe's order, and Saul confirmed the cigarette butt was with a contact for analysis. I hung up, staring at Quayle's note on the desk. The answer is 0. The vault, the hum, the shadow. This case was a maze with no exit. But Wolfe's brain was a machine, and I could almost hear it humming, louder than anything Charlie heard. I just hoped the trap we'd set wouldn't snap shut on us. Chapter 9. Midnight Intruder. It was the early hours of Tuesday, April 23rd, and I was starting to think the Quayle case was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The locked vault where Dr. Leonard Quayle had been clubbed into oblivion was still a concrete riddle. Dr. Elias Vaughn was seeing his shadowy stalker around every corner. And Nero Wolfe was acting like he'd already solved the puzzle, but was waiting for the moon to be in the right phase to tell me. I was in bed trying to catch a few hours of sleep after the faculty mixer where I'd spread Wolfe's rumour about cracking the case, when a faint noise, like a cat burglar with a clumsy streak, jerked me awake. The clock on my nightstand glowed, 1:17 a.m. The brownstone was silent except for that noise, a soft scrape coming from downstairs, near the office. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my .38 from the nightstand, and pulled on a pair of pants, my heart pounding like a drum solo. Wolfe was snoring in his room. Fritz was dead to the world in the basement. And the only thing standing between us and an intruder was me, Archie Goodwin, with a gun and a bad feeling. I crept down the stairs, avoiding the creaky third step, my bare feet cold on the wood. The scrape came again, sharper now, from the office door that opens to the back hall. The brownstone's locks are top-notch, but no lock's perfect, and I'd learned from yesterday's adventure in Quayle's office that determination can beat hardware. I eased into the hall, the .38 steady in my hand, and pressed myself against the wall, listening. A faint click, like a pick hitting a tumbler, confirmed it. Someone was trying to break in. I glanced at the office door's one-way glass, but it was too dark to see anything. The intruder was good, working quiet and fast, but not good enough to beat the Goodwin reflexes. I flipped on the hall light, hoping to spook them, and shouted, "Freeze, or I'll ventilate you!" The scraping stopped, followed by a muffled curse and the sound of footsteps retreating toward the back door. I sprinted to the office, yanked open the door, and caught a glimpse of a tall figure in a dark coat and hat. Vaughn's shadow, maybe, darting through the backyard. I ran after them, the cold April air biting my bare chest, but they were fast, vaulting the fence into the alley like an Olympic hurdler. I fired a warning shot into the air, hoping to scare them into tripping, but they were gone, swallowed by the night. I stood there, panting, the .38 warm in my hand, cursing myself for not being quicker. The backyard was empty, the fence undisturbed except for a scuff mark on the wood. I checked the back door, lock scratched but intact, the intruder's work interrupted. Whoever they were, they'd been after something in the office. Quayle's notebook, Vaughn's emails, or maybe just Wolfe's head. Back inside, I locked the door, turned on the office lights, and checked for damage. The desk was untouched, the safe secure. Quayle's note, the answer is 0, still on Wolfe's blotter. I called Saul Panzer, who was crashing at a hotel after tailing Vaughn, and told him to check the brownstone's block for stragglers. He promised to be over by dawn. I considered waking Wolfe, but decided against it. He'd only grunt and tell me to handle it, and I was too wired to sleep anyway. By 2 a.m., I was in the office, sipping coffee and typing a report of the break-in, my nerves still jangling. The intruder's speed and Vaughn's description, tall, dark coat, hat, matched, but it was too neat, like a clue left on purpose. I checked the office windows, all locked, and the front door untouched. The back door's lock would need a locksmith, but that could wait till morning. I leaned back, staring at the note, wondering if the killer was desperate enough to risk Wolfe's lair. At 6 a.m., Saul arrived, looking like he'd slept better than me, but not by much. He'd swept the alley and found a cigarette butt, same brand as the one from the faculty mixer's alley, suggesting our shadow was a chain smoker with bad habits. He bagged it for prints and promised to run it through his contacts. I thanked him, sent him to check on Vaughn, and caught a quick shower, my mind racing with questions. Was the intruder one of our suspects, Hensley, Tate, Rourke, or Vaughn's shadow, or both? And why the office? The rumour I'd spread at the mixer had clearly hit a nerve, but whose? By 8 a.m., I was back in the office, Fritz's bacon and eggs settling my stomach but not my mood. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 9, all 1/7 of a ton, in a grey suit with a fresh phalaenopsis in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that said he knew I'd been up to something. "Archie," he said, "you look haggard. Report." I handed him my typed account of the break-in. enjoying his raised eyebrow. Someone tried to crack the office at 1:17 a.m. Tall, dark coat, hat fast as a jackrabbit. Got away over the fence. Locks scratched but held. Saul found a cigarette. But same brand as the mixers. I chased, fired a warning shot. No dice. Wolfe skimmed the report, his lips pursed. Satisfactory. The rumour has provoked as intended. The intruder sought our evidence, Quayle's notebook, perhaps. I leaned back, my eyes burning. Or they wanted to shut you up. You sure this trap's worth it? Indubitably, Wolfe said, his tone smug. The killer is rattled, their caution fraying. We are close, Archie. Close to what? I snapped. A bullet. We've got a ghost in a coat, a hum nobody hears, and a note that's mocking us. Wolfe grunted, unfazed. The hum is our guide. Quayle's acoustic trigger suggests a sound-based mechanism, possibly the murder weapon. The vault's isolation amplifies its relevance. I groaned, my head throbbing. A sound weapon? You're sounding like a pulp novel. Science, not sensationalism, Wolfe said, flipping open Quayle's notebook. Call Mr. Panzer. Inquire about Vaughan's status. I dialed Saul, who was with Vaughan at a hotel. Vaughan had seen the shadow again at 7 a.m., outside the hotel. But Saul found no trace. He'd run the cigarette butts. Prints smudged. No match yet. I relayed it to Wolfe, who nodded, his fingers drumming on the desk. Vaughan is due at 11, I said. He's bringing more of Quayle's emails. You think the shadow's our intruder? Likely, Wolfe said. The killer fears exposure. The rumour has forced their hand. I rubbed my temples, picturing the chase through the backyard. So what's next? Another rumour? A neon sign saying "Killer Wanted"? Wolfe's eyes glinted, a rare sign of amusement. Patience, Archie. The trap is set. We await the spring. Prepare for Mr. Vaughan's arrival. I straightened the office, my nerves still raw from the break-in. At 11:05 the doorbell rang, and I let Vaughan in, who looked like he'd been running from a horror flick. His satchel was clutched tight, his glasses fogged, and his hair was a grey explosion. He dropped into the red leather chair, gasping like he'd sprinted from campus. Mr. Wolfe, he said, the shadow was outside my hotel. I'm not safe anywhere. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. Describe this sighting. Tall, dark coat, hat, across the street at 7 a.m., Vaughan said. I called Saul, but he was gone by the time he checked. Please, I need protection. Mr. Panzer is sufficient, Wolfe said, his tone calm. Your emails? Vaughan fumbled in his satchel, producing a USB drive. Quayle's final correspondence. He was emailing a tech firm, hinting at selling his conjecture. He mentioned a sonic key, something about sound unlocking his proof. Wolfe took the drive, his eyes narrowing. A sonic key, most intriguing. You will stay for lunch, Dr. Vaughan. Vaughan paled. Lunch? I can't. I need to. You will stay, Wolfe said, his tone final. Fritz is preparing chaudreau. I hid a grin, knowing Vaughan was no match for Wolfe's hospitality. I spent the next hour typing up the break-in and Vaughan's latest panic, my fingers itching to punch. Something? Lunch was a Fritz masterpiece, chaudreau, creamed potatoes, and a lemon tart that could have made a judge smile. Vaughan ate like a man expecting arsenic, while Wolfe savoured each bite, his brain clearly elsewhere. By 1 p.m, Vaughan was gone, escorted by Saul, and I was back in the office, calling Fred Durkin for an update on the camera glitch. He'd traced the power flicker to a junction box near the alley, tampered with but no prints. I relayed it to Wolfe, who nodded, his fingers drumming on the USB drive. "Call Mr. Cather," Wolfe said. "Inquire about the laptop." I dialed Ori, who was finally making progress. A homicide clerk owed him a favour and might sneak a look at Quayle's laptop tomorrow. I hung up, staring at the note on the desk. The answer is 0. The break-in, the hum, the sonic key. This case was a labyrinth, and I was stumbling blind. But Wolfe's calm was unshakable, his eyes glinting like a hunter closing in. I just hoped the trap he'd set wouldn't catch us instead. Chapter 10. The cryptic note. It was Tuesday, April 23rd, and the Quayle case was starting to feel like a bad joke, told by a mathematician with a grudge against clarity. The locked vault where Dr. Leonard Quayle had been bashed into the great beyond was still a sealed puzzle. Dr. Elias Varn was jumping at shadows like a cat in a dog pound, and Nero Wolfe was acting like he'd solved the whole thing, but was waiting for the planets to align before letting me in on it. I was in the office at 8 a.m., sipping Fritz's coffee, and trying to make sense of a case that was piling up clues like a hoarder collects junk. But none of it fit together. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably debating the meaning of life with his orchids, leaving me to wrestle with a stack of notes that were starting to look like modern art. Last night's break-in attempt at the brownstone had left me wired and cranky. My chase after the tall figure in the dark coat and hat yielding nothing but a scuff mark on the fence and a cigarette butt that matched one from the faculty mixer. Saul Panzer was running the butts for prints, but so far they were as clean as a whistle. The rumour I'd spread at the mixer that Wolfe had cracked the vault's secret had clearly rattled someone, enough to risk breaking into our fortress. Saul was still tailing Varn, who'd reported another shadow sighting outside his hotel, though Saul hadn't spotted the elusive figure. Fred Durkin's camera glitch was looking like deliberate sabotage, but with no fingerprints, it was a lead as solid as smoke. Ori Cather was finally making headway on Quayle's laptop, with a homicide clerk promising a peek soon. Quayle's notebook, which I'd swiped from his office, was Wolfe's new obsession, especially its references to zero states and acoustic triggers. He was convinced the murder was about stealing Quayle's prime number conjecture, a mathematical breakthrough worth millions in cryptography, and that the janitor's hum tied to a sonic anomaly Quayle had been exploring. The note in Quayle's hand, the answer is 0, and Varn's threat, 0 is coming, were the only solid clues, but they were about as clear as a fog bank. My job was to keep the wheels turning while Wolfe played Einstein, so I reviewed my notes, hoping for a spark. The phone rang at 8:45, jarring me from my haze. It was Saul, his voice sharp with news. "Archie, I cracked something on Quayle's note. That phrase, the answer is 0, isn't just math. It's a reference to a specific constant in number theory, the Riemann zeta function at a critical point. Quayle was bragging about solving a piece of his conjecture. I checked with a math prof pal. It's a big deal, could break encryption wide open. I scribbled that down, my pulse quickening. So the note's a boast, not a suicide. Exactly, Saul said, and Varn's 0 is coming note mimics it, like the killer's taunting him with Quayle's own words. I'm still on Varn. He's at a cafe. Says he saw the shadow at 7 a.m. No sign yet, but I'm close. Great work, I said. Check the cafe. Keep on Varn. He's due here at 11. Anything on the suspects? Hensley's loan sharks threatening her, Saul said. Tate's PIs digging into Quayle's finances. Rourke's tech firms offering him a deal if his lawsuit wins. Motives are stacking up. I thanked him, wrote a note for Wolfe. Saul decoded note. Riemann Zeta constant, conjecture breakthrough. Varn saw shadow, suspects updates, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I reviewed Quayle's emails from Varn's latest USB drive, which mentioned a sonic key and a tech firm sniffing around his work. Wolfe's sound weapon theory was starting to feel less like science fiction, but I still couldn't see how it cracked the vault. At 10:50, the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, all 400 pounds of him in a brown suit with a yellow phalaenopsis in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that demanded results I didn't have. Archie, he said, report. I handed him my notes. Saul says the answer is 0, refers to the Riemann Zeta function, a key to Quayle's conjecture. Big money in encryption. Varn's note is a copycat taunt. Varn saw the shadow again, no confirmation. Hensley's loan sharks circling, Tate's PIs on Quayle's money, Rourke's tech firms dangling cash. Fred's glitch is sabotage, no prints. Ori's close on the laptop. Break-ins got me twitchy, cigarette butts match, but no prints. Wolfe skimmed the notes, his lips pursed. Satisfactory. The note's significance confirms the motive. Theft of Quayle's breakthrough. The break-in proves our rumour has struck a nerve. I leaned back, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep. Struck a nerve? Someone tried to crack our safe. You still think this sonic nonsense is the key? Indubitably, Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. Quayle's sonic key suggests a sound-based mechanism, perhaps a computational tool, perhaps a weapon. The vault's acoustics amplify its relevance. The hum is our lodestar. I groaned, my head throbbing. A sound weapon. You're sounding like Buck Rogers. Science, not fantasy, Wolfe said, flipping open Quayle's notebook. The Riemann Zeta constant is a beacon. The killer sought to suppress or steal it. I rubbed my temples, picturing the vault's concrete walls. So, how'd they get in? Sound doesn't bend steel. Patience, Archie, Wolfe said, which meant he wasn't telling. Call Mr. Durkin. Inquire about the junction box. I dialed Fred, who was still poking at the camera glitch. He'd confirmed the junction box tampering was deliberate. Wires, cut with precision, no amateur job. No prints, no witnesses, but it happened the day before Quayle's death. I relayed it to Wolfe, who nodded, his fingers drumming on the desk. Varn is due at 11, I said. He's bringing more of Quayle's notes. You think the shadow's our killer? Almost certainly, Wolfe said. The break-in was no coincidence. The killer fears exposure and seeks our evidence. I snorted. Great, so I'm bait and burglar bait. What's next? Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. We tighten the net. The trap is working. The killer is desperate. We must provoke further. Provoke, I said, my stomach sinking. Last time, I got a midnight chase. What's this one gonna cost me? Vigilance, Wolfe said, his tone final. Prepare for Mr. Varn. I straightened the office, my nerves still raw from the break-in. At 11:10, The doorbell rang, and I let Varn in, who looked like he'd been running from a pack of wolves. His satchel was stuffed, his glasses smudged, and his hair was a grey catastrophe. He dropped into the red leather chair, gasping like he'd sprinted from the Bronx. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "the shadow was outside the cafe, 7 a.m. I'm not safe anywhere." Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. "Describe this sighting." "Tall, dark coat, hat, across the street," Varn said. "I hid in the cafe, called Saul, but he was gone. Please, I need more protection." "Mr. Panzer is adequate," Wolfe said, his tone calm. "Your notes?" Varn fumbled in his satchel, producing a stack of papers. Quayle's final calculations from his office safe. They're about the zeta function, his breakthrough. He was scared someone would steal it. Wolfe took the papers, his eyes narrowing. "Scared of whom?" "He didn't say," Varn said, "but he mentioned interference. Someone sabotaging his experiments. Could it be the shadow?" "Possibly," Wolfe said, filing that away. "You will stay for lunch, Dr. Varn." Varn paled. "Lunch? I can't, I need to." "You will stay," Wolfe said, his tone final. "Fritz is preparing Chadreau." I hid a grin, knowing Varn was no match for Wolfe's culinary bullying. I spent the next hour typing up Varn's latest panic and Saul's breakthrough. My fingers itching to crack the case, or at least a knuckle. Lunch was a Fritz masterpiece. Chadreau, creamed spinach, and a lemon soufflé that could have made a jury sing. Varn ate like a man expecting poison, while Wolfe savoured each bite, his brain clearly elsewhere. By 1 p.m, Varn was gone, escorted by Saul, and I was back in the office, calling Ori for an update on the laptop. His homicide clerk had come through. Quayle's laptop had a hidden file, encrypted, titled Zero Key. Ori was trying to crack it, but it needed a math expert. I relayed it to Wolfe, who nodded, his fingers drumming on the papers. "Call Mr. Cather," Wolfe said. "Instruct him to consult Dr. Varn on the file." I dialed Ori, passing on the order, and hung up, staring at the note on the desk. The answer is 0. The break-in, the hum, the zeta constant. This case was a maze with no exit. But Wolfe's calm was unshakable, his eyes glinting like a hunter closing in. I just hoped the net he was tightening wouldn't strangle us first. Chapter 11. The Encrypted Breakthrough. It was Wednesday, April 24th, and I was starting to think the Quayle case was a labyrinth designed by a mathematician with a vendetta against sanity. The locked vault where Dr. Leonard Quayle had been clubbed into oblivion was still a concrete conundrum. Dr. Elias Varn was seeing his shadowy stalker at every turn, and Nero Wolfe was acting like he'd already unravelled the mystery, but was waiting for a cosmic cue to spill the beans. I was in the office at 7:30 a.m., fueled by Fritz's coffee and a growing sense of frustration, trying to piece together a case that was piling up clues like a squirrel hoarding nuts, but nothing fit. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably, lecturing his orchids on number theory, leaving me to wrestle with a stack of notes that were starting to look like a drunk's diary. The midnight break-in 2 nights ago had left me jumpy. The image of that tall figure in a dark coat and hat, vaulting our fence, burned into my brain. Saul Panzer's decoding of Quayle's note, "The answer is 0," as a reference to the Riemann zeta function, had confirmed Wolfe's theory that the murder was about stealing Quayle's prime number conjecture, a breakthrough worth millions in cryptography. The matching threat to Varn, "Zero is coming," was a killer's taunt. But we still didn't know who or how. Fred Durkin's camera glitch on March 24th was deliberate sabotage. But with no prints, it was a lead as solid as a cloud. Ori Cather had struck gold on Quayle's laptop, finding an encrypted file called Zero Key. But it needed Varn's expertise to crack. Saul was still tailing Varn, who'd reported another shadow sighting yesterday, though Saul hadn't. Spotted the elusive figure. The phone rang at 8:15, snapping me out of my haze. It was Ori, sounding like he'd hit the jackpot. "Archie, the homicide clerk got me into Quayle's laptop last night. That Zero Key file's a beast. Equations, diagrams, something about acoustic resonance. Varn's got a look at it. I'm bringing a copy to the brownstone at 10. "Nice work," I said, scribbling it down. "Varn's due at 11. Stick around." I hung up, wrote a note for Wolfe. Ori cracked laptop. Zero Key file, acoustic resonance, Varn needed, due at 10, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I reviewed Quayle's notebook, which Wolfe was obsessed with, especially its mentions of zero states and acoustic triggers. His theory about a sound-based mechanism, maybe a weapon, maybe a tool, was starting to feel less like science fiction. But I still couldn't see how it opened a locked vault. The hum the janitor heard, the camera glitch, the shadow. It was all connected, but the thread was invisible. At 9:50, Ori arrived, looking smug as he handed me a USB drive with the laptop's file. I locked it in the safe, knowing Wolfe would want to grill him. At 10:55 the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, all 1/7 of a ton in a grey suit with a yellow Miltonia in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that demanded progress I was barely holding. "On to. Archie," he said, "report." I handed him my notes. "Ori's got a file from Quayle's laptop, Zero Key, full of equations and acoustic resonance. Needs Varn to decode it. He's due at 11. Saul says Varn saw the shadow again, no confirmation. Fred's glitch is sabotage, no prints. Suspects: Hensley's loan sharks tightening the screws, Tate's PIs sniffing Quayle's bank accounts, Rourke's tech firms offering big bucks. Break-ins got me edgy. Cigarette butts match, no prints yet." Wolfe skimmed the notes. His lips pursed. "Satisfactory. The Zero Key file is pivotal. Quayle's conjecture hinges on sound, computational resonance, perhaps a cryptographic key. The murder was to steal or suppress it." I leaned back, my head spinning. So the killer used sound to crack Quayle's skull. That's still nuts. "Not nuts," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Science. The vault's acoustics are critical. Its isolation, its resonance. The hum is our guide." I groaned, picturing the concrete box. Guide to what? The vault's sealed, no weapon, no way in. "Patience, Archie," Wolfe said, which meant I'd get no more. "Mr. Cather, describe the file." Ori, lounging in the red leather chair, shrugged. "Heavy math, graphs, frequencies, something about zeta harmonics. Looked like gibberish to me, but Varn'll know. Clark says Quayle was paranoid, kept the file hidden." Wolfe nodded, filing that away. "Stay available, Mr. Cather. We may need further access." Ori grinned and left, probably to charm another clerk. I turned to Wolfe, my patience fraying. "You're betting the farm on this sound thing. What's the play?" Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. We confront the killer indirectly. Tonight, you and Dr. Varn will meet the suspects, Hensley, Tate, Rourke, at a neutral venue, a restaurant. Present the zero key file as a breakthrough I've decoded, implying the killer's method is exposed. Observe their reactions. Stared, my stomach sinking. You want me to wave a red flag at a bull? After the break-in? The trap tightens, Wolfe said, his tone smug. Mr. Panzer will shadow you, Mr. Durkin, as backup. The killer will react. Fear, anger, flight. We will see. I muttered something unprintable, picturing a dinner turning into a brawl. And if they pull a gun? Discretion, not bravado, Wolfe said. Arrange it, Archie. A private room, 8 p.m. I groaned but called Varn, who was at a library, and told him to round up Hensley, Tate and Rourke for dinner at Vinnie's, a quiet Italian joint on 52nd Street. He stammered, terrified, but agreed when I mentioned Saul's protection. I called Saul and Fred, setting them up as my shadows, and reserved a private room at Vinnie's, my nerves already jangling at the thought of playing bait again. At 11:15, the doorbell rang, and I let Varn in, who looked like he'd been chased by a pack of ghosts. His satchel was stuffed, his glasses fogged, and his tie was a knot only a lunatic could love. He dropped into the red leather chair, gasping, "Mr. Wolfe, the shadow was outside the library, 9 a.m. I'm falling apart." Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. Describe this sighting. Tall, dark coat, hat, near the steps, Varn said. I ran inside, called Saul, but he was gone. Please, I can't keep doing this. Mr. Panzer is vigilant, Wolfe said, his tone calm. The zero key file. Your assessment. Varn fumbled in his satchel, pulling out a notepad. I glanced at Ori's copy. It's Quayle's core proof, zeta function harmonics, using sound waves to stabilize computations. It's revolutionary, worth billions. He mentions a resonance lock, maybe tied to the vault. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A resonance lock. Intriguing. You will examine the file here now. Varn nodded, his hands shaking as I handed him the USB drive. He plugged it into my laptop, muttering about frequencies while Wolfe watched like a hawk. I stood by, my mind racing. Sound waves, locks, billions. The vault's hum was starting to feel like a siren's call, but I still couldn't see the shore. By 1 p.m., Varn was deep in equations, and Wolfe called for lunch. Fritz's shad roe, mashed parsnips, and a berry tart that could have made a jury weep. Varn ate like a man expecting poison, while Wolfe savoured each bite, his brain clearly elsewhere. After lunch, Varn stayed, scribbling notes on the file, while I typed up the morning's chaos, my fingers itching to punch something. At 6 p.m., I headed to Vinnie's, Saul and Fred in tow. The private room was cosy. Red walls, white tablecloths, a chandelier that screamed old money. Varn arrived with Hensley, Tate and Rourke, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I sat at the head, Varn beside me, the suspects across, their eyes wary. Saul was outside, Fred at the bar, both wired for trouble. Thanks for coming, I said, raising a glass of Chianti. Nero Wolfe's got a breakthrough on Quayle's murder. That zero key file. Sound waves, zeta harmonics. He says it's how the vault was breached. Hensley's fork froze mid-air, her eyes sharp. Sound waves? That's absurd. Tate snorted, his beard twitching. Wolfe's bluffing. The vault's a fortress. Rourke's leg bounced, his face pale. What's this file? Quayle's proof? Exactly, I said, watching them. Worth billions, and Wolfe's got it figured. The killer's trick, the whole deal. The room went quiet, the air thick with tension. Hensley sipped her wine, her hand steady, but her jaw tight. Tate glared at his plate, his knuckles white. Rourke excused himself to the restroom, his steps quick. I signalled Saul to watch the exits, my gut telling me someone was cracking. Dinner dragged on. Lasagna, tiramisu, small talk that felt like a minefield. Rourke returned, sweat on his brow, and Tate kept glancing at the door. Hensley asked pointed questions about Wolfe's theory, her tone too casual. By 10 p.m, we wrapped up, the suspects leaving one by one. Saul reported Rourke making a call, in the restroom, voice low, words unclear. Tate lingered in the parking lot, checking his phone. Hensley left fast, her driver peeling out. Back at the brownstone by 11, I reported to Wolfe, who was sipping beer and reading Vaughan's notes. They're rattled, I said. Rourke's twitchy, Tate's edgy, Hensley's too calm. Someone's guilty? Satisfactory, Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. The net tightens. The killer will act soon. Fear drives them. I groaned, my nerves frayed. Act how? Another break-in? I'm running on fumes. Vigilance, Archie, Wolfe said, flipping a page. The hum, the file, the note, all converge. We are close. I stared at the desk, Quayle's note mocking me. The answer is 0. The vault, the shadow, the resonance. This case was a knot I couldn't untie. But Wolfe's calm was a rock, his brain humming louder than any sound Quayle ever heard. I just hoped the killer's next move wouldn't be our last. Chapter 12. The Vault Unlocked. It was Thursday, April 25th, and the Quayle case was starting to feel like a chess game, where I was a pawn and Nero Wolfe was playing Grandmaster with half the board hidden. The sealed vault where Dr. Leonard Quayle had met his maker was still a concrete enigma. Dr. Elias Vaughan was jumping at shadows like a rabbit in a fox den, and Wolfe was acting like he'd cracked the case wide open, but was waiting for the perfect moment to drop the bombshell. I was in the office at 7 a.m., fueled by Fritz's coffee and a growing sense of impatience, trying to piece together a puzzle that was all edges and no picture. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably debating the finer points of number theory with his orchids, leaving me to wrestle with a case that was piling up clues like a blizzard piles up snow. Last night's dinner at Vinnie's had stirred the pot with the suspects. Dr. Margaret Hensley, Dr. Simon Tate, and Paul Rourke, reacting to my bait about Wolfe decoding Quayle's zero-key file. Hensley had been too calm, Tate too edgy, and Rourke too twitchy. But none had confessed, and Saul Panzer's tail on them had caught only Rourke's suspicious phone call. The zero-key file, full of equations about acoustic resonance and zeta harmonics, had Vaughan convinced it was Quayle's billion-dollar breakthrough in cryptography. Wolfe's obsession with the janitor's hum and Quayle's sonic key was starting to make sense, but I still couldn't see how sound opened a locked vault or bashed a skull. The midnight break-in, the camera glitch, the shadow stalking. Vaughan, it was a tangle of threads, and I was itching to cut through. The phone rang at 7:45, jolting me from my haze. It was Saul, his voice crisp with news. Archie, I followed Rourke after dinner. He met a guy in a dark coat near his apartment. Couldn't see the face, but it matches Varn's shadow. They argued, then split. I'm on Varn now. He's at a diner. Says he saw the shadow at 6 a.m. No sign yet. Stay on both, I said, scribbling it down. Rourke's meeting smells like trouble. Varn's due here at 11. Anything else? Hensley paid off part of her loan shark debt yesterday, Saul said. Tate's PI found Quayle was consulting for a tech firm. Big bucks. Motives are piling up. I thanked him, wrote a note for Wolfe. Saul. Rourke met Shadow. Varn saw Shadow. Hensley paid debt. Tate's PI on Quayle's tech deal and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I reviewed the zero-key file notes Varn had scribbled yesterday, full of terms like resonance, lock, and zeta harmonics. Wolfe's theory that the murder was about stealing Quayle's conjecture, and that sound was the key, felt close, but the vault's steel door and concrete walls mocked me every time I thought about it. At 10:50, the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, all 1/7 of a ton, in a brown suit with a yellow phalaenopsis in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that demanded results I was scrambling to deliver. Archie, he said, report. I handed him my notes. Saul says Rourke met a guy in a dark coat last night. Maybe Varn's shadow. Varn saw it again. No confirmation. Hensley's paying her shark. Tate's PI found Quayle's tech deal. Ori's zero-key file is Quayle's proof. Sound waves, zeta stuff, worth billions. Fred's glitch is sabotage. No prints. Break-ins got me jumpy. Cigarette butts match. No prints. Wolfe skimmed the notes, his lips pursed. Satisfactory. The shadow's movement confirms our trap's success. The zero-key file is the motive, theft of a cryptographic revolution. The killer used sound, Archie, not to kill, but to enter. I blinked, my coffee going cold. Enter? You're saying sound opened the vault? Precisely, Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. Quayle's resonance lock manipulated the vault's acoustics, vibrations to disrupt the keypads, electronics. The hum was its echo. I leaned back, my head spinning. Vibrations, like a tuning fork cracking a safe. Crude, but apt, Wolfe said, flipping open Quayle's notebook. The killer stole this knowledge, killed Quayle to silence him, and left the note, the answer is 0, as a taunt or misdirection. I groaned, picturing the vault's keypad. So, where's the weapon? And who's the shadow? Questions for tonight, Wolfe said, his tone smug. We will reconstruct the crime here with all parties. Varn, Hensley, Tate, Rourke, Inspector Kramer. You will arrange it, 8 p.m. I will demonstrate the method and expose the killer. I stared, my stomach sinking. You want to cram a murderer, a nervous wreck, and Kramer in here, after the break-in? The net closes, Wolfe said, his chair creaking. Mr. Panzer will secure the premises, Mr. Durkin as backup. The killer will crack under pressure. Arrange it, Archie. I muttered something unprintable, picturing a shouting match with Kramer in the middle. I called Varn, who was at the diner, and told him to bring Hensley, Tate and Rourke to the brownstone at 8 p.m. for Wolfe's revelation. He stammered, terrified, but agreed when I mentioned Saul's protection. I called Kramer, who growled but promised to show, intrigued, despite himself. Saul and Fred were on board, ready to play muscle, and I warned Fritz to prepare for a crowd, my nerves already fraying at the thought of herding this circus. At 11:20 the doorbell rang, and I let Varn in, who looked like he'd been running from a horror flick. His satchel was stuffed, his glasses fogged, and his hair was a grey disaster. He dropped into the red leather chair, gasping, "Mr. Wolfe, the shadow was outside the diner 6 a.m. I can't take this." Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. "Describe this sighting." "Tall, dark coat, hat, near the corner," Varn said. "I hid inside, called Saul, but he was gone. Please, end this." "Tonight it ends," Wolfe said, his tone calm. "Your notes on the 0 key." Varn pulled a notepad from his satchel, his hands shaking. "It's Quayle's proof. Sound waves stabilizing zeta computations, a resonance lock to secure it. He was testing it in the vault, using the acoustics. It's genius, but dangerous." Wolfe took the notepad, his eyes narrowing. "Dangerous? How?" "Someone could misuse it," Varn said. "Weaponize the frequencies, maybe. Quayle was paranoid, thought his rivals knew." Wolfe grunted, filing that away. "You will stay for lunch, Dr. Varn." Varn paled. "Lunch? I can't." "You will stay," Wolfe said, his tone final. "Fritz is preparing Shad Row." I hid a grin, knowing Varn was no match for Wolfe's culinary trap. I spent the next hour typing up Varn's panic and Wolfe's plan, my fingers itching to crack the case, or at least a knuckle. Lunch was a Fritz masterpiece. Shad Row, creamed potatoes, and a lemon tart that could have made a jury sing. Varn ate like a man expecting doom, while Wolfe savoured each bite, his brain clearly elsewhere. By 2 p.m, Varn was gone, escorted by Saul, and I was calling the suspects to confirm their attendance. Hensley was curt, Tate grumbled, Rourke sounded nervous, but all agreed to come. Kramer called back, demanding to know Wolfe's angle, but I dodged, saying he'd see tonight. I checked the office. Safe locked, windows secure, Quayle's note on the desk. The answer is 0. My .38 was in its holster, ready for trouble. Ding. 7:30 p.m. Saul and Fred arrived, taking posts outside to watch for the shadow. The doorbell started ringing at 8:05. Varn first, then Hensley, Tate, Rourke, and finally Kramer, his bulldog face red with skepticism. I seated them in the office, Varn in the red leather chair, the suspects in yellow ones, Kramer near the globe, his unlit cigar twitching. Wolfe entered at 8:15, his bulk filling the room, a fresh orchid in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the flower, and surveyed the crowd like a conductor facing an orchestra. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice a low rumble, "we are here to resolve the murder of Dr. Leonard Quayle, killed March 22nd in a locked vault. The police deemed it unsolvable." "I disagree," Kramer snorted. "Get to it, Wolfe. What's this about sound?" Wolfe's eyes glinted. "Patience, Inspector. Quayle's death was no mystery, but a theft of his prime number conjecture, cryptographic breakthrough worth billions. His note, the answer is 0. Celebrated a Riemann zeta solution. The killer stole this, using Quayle's own resonance lock. Sound waves to disrupt the vault's keypad." Hensley frowned. "Sound waves? That's impossible." "Is it?" Wolfe said, leaning forward. "Quayle's 0 key file details acoustic resonance, vibrations to manipulate electronics. The vault's isolation amplified it. The hum, heard by the janitor, was its trace. Tate scoffed. "You're guessing. Where's the weapon?" The weapon, Wolfe said, was a blunt object, likely a tool from Quayle's desk, discarded later. The killer entered during a 10-second camera glitch engineered by tampering with a junction box. Rourke's leg bounced, his face pale. "Who'd do that?" Wolfe's gaze swept the room, lingering on each suspect. Someone with motive, professional jealousy, financial desperation, intellectual theft. Dr. Hensley, your grant loss. Dr. Tate, your tenure block. Mr. Rourke, your stolen thesis. Dr. Varn, your rivalry. Varn gasped. "Me? I hired you." "Indeed," Wolfe said, his tone icy. "Yet the shadow stalking you, a tall figure in a dark coat, suggests a partner or a ruse." Kramer stood, his cigar twitching. "Enough, Wolfe. Name the killer, or I'm out." Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. "The killer is among us, betrayed by their reaction to my rumour that I'd solved the vault's secret. Tonight, I observed fear, denial, and flight. The truth lies in the resonance, the note, the shadow." The room went silent, all eyes on Wolfe. I gripped my chair, my .38 close, sensing the net closing. Hensley's jaw was tight, Tate's fists clenched, Rourke's sweat glistened, Varn's eyes darted. Kramer glared, waiting. Wolfe's voice dropped, a hammer ready to fall. "Dr. Tate," he said, "your movements betray you. Your late-night visit to the vault, your PI's inquiries, your meeting with a tech firm's agent, the shadow. You killed Quayle, using his resonance lock to steal his proof." Tate shot up, his face red. "That's a lie. I was home." "Your wife's alibi is loyalty, not truth," Wolfe cut in. "The cigarette butts, your brand, found at the mixer, and our break-in. You sought Quayle's notebook, fearing exposure." Tate lunged, but Saul and Fred were faster, pinning him. Kramer roared, cuffing Tate himself, while Hensley, Rourke, and Varn stared stunned. I exhaled, my heart pounding, as Wolfe leaned back, his eyes glinting with triumph. "The case is closed," he said, sipping a beer Fritz had slipped in. "The vault is unlocked," the Zero answered. I typed up the chaos later, my fingers shaky but relieved. The vault, the hum, the shadow, it was over. But as Tate was hauled away, cursing, I caught Varn's glance, grateful but haunted. Wolfe's net had caught the killer, but the cost was steep, and I wondered if Zero was ever really the answer. Chapter 13. The Zero Summit was Friday, April 26th, and the Quayle case was finally starting to feel like a book I could close, though the pages were dog-eared and stained with sweat. Last night's showdown in the brownstone had ended with Dr. Simon Tate in cuffs, dragged off by Inspector Kramer after Nero Wolfe pinned him as Dr. Leonard Quayle's killer. The locked vault mystery was cracked, but I was still picking up the pieces, tying loose ends while Wolfe basked in his victory, like a cat in a sunbeam. I was in the office at 7 a.m., fueled by Fritz's coffee and a lingering adrenaline buzz, trying to make sense of a case that had twisted my brain into knots for weeks. Tate's arrest was the headline, but it didn't answer everything. The vault where Quayle died, 10 by 12 feet of concrete, steel door, keypad lock, had been breached by Tate using Quayle's own resonance lock, a sound-based trick to disrupt the keypad's electronics. The hum the janitor heard, the note in Quayle's hand, the answer is 0. And Vaughan's threat, 0 is coming, all pointed to Quayle's breakthrough on the Riemann zeta function. A cryptographic gold mine worth billions. Tate, driven by a tenure grudge and greed, had stolen the proof, bashed Quayle with a desk tool, and slipped out during a sabotaged camera glitch. The shadow-stalking Dr. Elias Vaughan, Tate or his tech firm accomplice, had been a ploy to keep. Vaughan scared and silent. But there were still gaps. The weapon's whereabouts, the tech firm's role, and Vaughan's shaky nerves. I reviewed my notes, which read like a thriller novel with half the chapters missing. Saul Panzer was wrapping up, his tale on Vaughan, who'd gone quiet since Tate's arrest. Fred Durkin was double-checking the camera glitch, hoping for a stray print. Ori Cather was digging into Tate's PI, who'd been sniffing Quayle's finances. The zero-key file from Quayle's laptop, full of zeta harmonics and acoustic resonance, was safe in our hands, but Vaughan was still decoding its finer points. My job was to nail down the details, keep Kramer from blowing a gasket, and make sure nobody else tried breaking into the brownstone. The phone rang at 7:45, cutting through my haze. It was Saul, his voice calm but tired. Archie, Vaughan's, at his apartment laying low. No shadow sighting since Tate's arrest, but he's still jumpy. I checked Tate's apartment last night, found a burner phone, likely used to coordinate with that tech firm. Kramer's got it now. Good work, I said, scribbling it down. Anything on the tech firm? Called Zenith Dynamics, Saul said. They're denying involvement, but their CEO's been emailing Tate about acquisitions. I'm digging deeper. Stay on it, I said. Vaughan's due here at 11. Keep an eye out. I hung up, wrote a note for Wolfe. Saul, Vaughan quiet, Tate's burner phone with Kramer, Zenith Dynamics link, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I reviewed Vaughan's latest notes on the zero-key file, which described a resonance lock using sound waves to manipulate electronics, a trick Tate had somehow mastered. Wolfe's theory about the vault's acoustics was spot on, but I still couldn't wrap my head around sound as a skeleton key. The cigarette butts from the break-in and mixer, Tate's brand, were a nice bow on the case, but I wanted the weapon to seal it tight. At 10:50, the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, all 400 pounds of him, in a grey suit with a yellow Miltonia in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that suggested he was already bored with victory. Archie, he said, report. I handed him my notes. Saul says Vaughan's calm, no shadow. Tate's burner phones with Kramer, linked to Zenith Dynamics, who are playing dumb. Fred's checking the glitch again. Ori's on Tate's PI. Vaughan's decoding the zero-key file. Says it's a lock using sound waves. Case is tied up, but I want the weapon. Wolfe skimmed the notes, his lips pursed. Satisfactory. The weapon is incidental, likely a wrench or paperweight, discarded in the Hudson. Tate's motive, greed and vengeance, is clear. Zenith Dynamics is a secondary concern. Their role was funding, not execution. I leaned back, my coffee cold. So we're done? Just hand Vaughan his proof and call it a day. Not quite, Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. Dr. Vaughan's fear lingers. We must ensure his safety and the proof's integrity. Also, Inspector, Kramer requires appeasement. His pride is bruised. I snorted, picturing Kramer's red face. Appeasement? He'll want your head on a platter for showing him up. Diplomacy, Archie, Wolfe said, flipping open Quayle's notebook. Arrange a meeting with Kramer, here at 6 p.m. Invite Dr. Varn, Dr. Hensley, Mr. Rourke. No need for Tate, he's detained. We will clarify the case's resolution. I groaned, envisioning another circus. You want to rub it in Kramer's face with an audience? Clarity, not gloating, Wolfe said, his tone smug. The proof's value demands transparency. Arrange it. I muttered something unprintable, but called Kramer, who growled but agreed to come, sensing Wolfe had more to say. I called Varn, who was relieved but nervous, and he promised to bring Hensley and Rourke, eager to close the chapter. Saul and Fred were on standby, just in case Zenith Dynamics or a stray shadow got frisky. I warned Fritz about the crowd, my nerves tingling at the thought of another showdown, even a tame one. At 11:25, the doorbell rang, and I let Varn in, who looked like he'd aged a decade since yesterday. His satchel was lighter, his glasses cleaner, but his eyes still darted like a hunted deer's. He dropped into the red leather chair, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for days. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "no shadow today, but I'm still scared. Is it really over?" Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. "Dr. Tate is in custody, Dr. Varn. The threat is neutralized. Your notes." Varn pulled a notepad from his satchel, steadier than before. "The zero key files. Complete. Quayle's proof stabilizes zeta computations with acoustic resonance, a new cryptographic standard. The resonance lock was his vault's safeguard. But Tate cracked it, probably from Quayle's notes." Wolfe took the notepad, his eyes narrowing. "Tate's method?" "He studied Quayle's work," Varn said. "Must have found a frequency. To disrupt the keypad, low amplitude, high precision. The vault's acoustics did the rest." I whistled, finally seeing it. So Tate hummed his way in, bashed Quayle, and walked out, all in 10 seconds. "Essentially," Wolfe said, his tone dry. "The note, the answer is 0, was Quayle's triumph, left as irony by Tate. You will stay for lunch, Doctor. Varn." Varn blinked, caught off guard. "Lunch? I suppose. You will stay," Wolfe said, his tone final. "Fritz is preparing roast pheasant." I hid a grin, knowing Varn was no match for Wolfe's kitchen diplomacy. I spent the next hour typing up Varn's explanation and Wolfe's plan, my fingers steadier, but my mind still racing. Lunch was a Fritz triumph. Pheasant, wild rice, and a chocolate torte that could have made a judge cry. Varn ate with less fear, while Wolfe savoured each bite, his brain clearly tying up loose ends. By 2 p.m, Varn was gone, escorted by Saul, and I was calling Fred for a final check on the glitch. He'd found a tool mark on the junction box, matching a wrench Tate owned, close enough to seal the sabotage angle. Ori reported Tate's PI had been hired by Zenith Dynamics, confirming their interest in Quayle's proof, though they'd backed off since the arrest. I relayed it to Wolfe, who nodded, his fingers drumming on the notepad. "Call Mr. Panzer," Wolfe said. "Ensure Dr. Varn's safety until tomorrow." I dialed Saul, passing on the order, and hung up, staring at Quayle's note on the desk. The answer is 0. The case was wrapping up, but I felt like I'd run a marathon in quicksand. At 5:50 p.m, the doorbell started ringing. Kramer first, his bulldog face less red, but still sour. Then Varn, Hensley and Rourke, all looking like they'd rather be at a funeral. I seated them in the office, Varn in the red leather chair, Hensley and Rourke in yellow ones, Kramer near the globe, his unlit cigar twitching. Wolfe entered at 6:05, his bulk commanding the room, a fresh orchid in his lapel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice a low rumble, "we gather to close the case of Dr. Leonard Quayle's murder, resolved last night with Dr. Simon. Tate's arrest. Questions linger, and I will clarify." Kramer snorted. "Clarify? You humiliated my department, Wolfe." "Truth humiliates no one," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Quayle was killed for his prime number conjecture, a cryptographic breakthrough. Tate, denied tenure by Quayle, stole it using a resonance lock. Sound waves to disrupt the vault's keypad, entering during a sabotaged camera glitch." Hensley frowned. "Sound waves? That's incredible." "Science, not sorcery," Wolfe said. "Quayle's zero-key file details it. Zeta harmonics stabilized by resonance, worth billions. Tate killed Quayle with a desk tool, discarded later, and left at the note, 'The answer is zero,' as mockery." Rourke shifted, his face pale. "The shadow. Was that Tate?" "Tate and an accomplice," Wolfe said. "Likely from Zenith. Dynamics who funded his scheme. The shadow terrorized Dr. Varn to ensure silence. Cigarette butts and a burner phone confirm Tate's guilt." Varn exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "So it's over?" "It is," Wolfe said, leaning back. "The proof is yours, Dr. Varn, to complete or publish. Zenith Dynamics is deterred. Tate is confined." Kramer stood, his cigar twitching. "You got lucky, Wolfe. I want that file for evidence." "Dr. Varn will provide a copy," Wolfe said, his tone final. "The case is closed." The room relaxed, Hensley and Rourke murmuring relief, Varn nearly weeping. Kramer grumbled but nodded, heading out with a promise to follow up. I escorted the others to the door, my heart lighter, but my head still spinning. Back in the office, Wolfe was sipping a beer Fritz had slipped in, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Comments?" I said, dropping into my chair. "A zero sum," Wolfe said, his tone dry. "The motive was greed, the method ingenuity, the resolution justice. Satisfactory." I snorted, staring at the note on his desk. Satisfactory. I aged 10 years. "Your fool is resilient," Wolfe said, flipping open a book, number theory naturally. "File the reports, Archie. Dinner is at 7. I typed up the finale, my fingers dancing but my mind quiet for the first time in weeks. The vault, the hum, the shadow. It was done. Tate was gone. Varn was safe, and Quayle's zero had its answer. But as I filed the papers, I caught Wolfe's glance, calm, smug, eternal. He'd played the game and won, and I was just glad to be on his side, even if it meant running through hell to get there. Chapter 14. The final equation, it was Monday, April 29th, and the Quayle case was finally starting to feel like a storm that had passed, leaving clear skies but a few puddles to mop up. Dr. Simon Tate was behind bars, charged with Dr. Leonard Quayle's murder, and the locked vault mystery that had twisted my brain for weeks was solved. Nero Wolfe had pulled off another miracle, proving the impossible was just a matter of perspective, and I was left to handle the paperwork while he lounged in, His greenhouse, probably debating prime numbers with his orchids. I was in the office at 8 a.m., sipping Fritz's coffee, and feeling like a boxer who'd gone 12 rounds but was still standing, ready to tie up the last loose ends of a case that had been equal parts genius and madness. Friday's meeting had sealed it. Wolfe laid out how Tate used Quayle's resonance lock, sound waves to disrupt the vault's keypad, to steal $1 billion prime number conjecture, bashed Quayle with a desk tool, and slipped out during a sabotaged camera glitch. The note, "The answer is 0, was Quayle's boast about cracking the Riemann zeta function, twisted by Tate into a taunt. Dr. Elias Vaughan's shadow, a mix of Tate and a Zenith Dynamics stooge, had kept him terrified, ensuring silence. Inspector Kramer, grudgingly impressed, took Tate away, while Vaughan, Dr. Margaret Hensley, and Paul Rourke left to the brownstone relieved but shaken. My job now was to wrap up the details, keep Vaughan safe, and make sure Zenith Dynamics didn't try any last-minute tricks. Over the weekend, I'd caught up on sleep, filed reports, and dodged Kramer's calls for more paperwork. He was sore about Wolfe outshining him, but couldn't deny the result. Saul Panzer was off Vaughan's tail, his job done, though he was still sniffing around Zenith Dynamics for kicks. Fred Durkin had confirmed the junction box tampering with a tool mark matching Tate's wrench, closing that angle. Ori Cather was back to chasing dames, his laptop work complete. Vaughan's notes on the 0 key file had filled in the gaps. Quayle's proof used acoustic resonance to stabilize zeta computations, a cryptographic game-changer, and the resonance lock was his vault's quirky safeguard, exploited by Tate's cunning. The phone rang at 8:30, breaking my reverie. It was Vaughan, sounding lighter than I'd ever heard him, like a man who'd finally exhaled. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm at Columbia, planning to publish Quayle's proof, my name on it too, as co-author. I wanted to thank Mr. Wolfe. Can I visit? Today?" "Sure," I said, jotting it down. "Come at 11. Got plans for the proof?" "I'm meeting a publisher tomorrow," Vaughan said. "It'll shake up cryptography, but I'm keeping it academic. No tech firms. Zenith Dynamics called, offering millions, but I'm done with shadows." "Smart move," I said. "See you at 11. I hung up, wrote a note for Wolfe, Vaughan, visiting at 11, plans to publish proof, no tech firms, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I reviewed Vaughan's final notes, which described the resonance lock's mechanics. Low-frequency vibrations tuned to the keypad circuits, amplified by the vault's acoustics. It was brilliant, and I could see why Tate, with his tenure, grudge and Zenith's backing, had killed to steal it. The cigarette butts, the burner phone, the camera glitch, it all fit. But I still felt a twinge, like a puzzle piece slightly off. At 10:50, the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, all 1/7 of a ton in a brown suit with a yellow cattleya in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that suggested he was ready to move on to the next challenge, while I was still dusting off this one. "Archie," he said, "report." I handed him my notes. "Vaughan's, coming at 11, plans to publish Quayle's proof, no tech firms. Saul's off Vaughan, digging Zenith for fun. Fred's glitch is locked down, tool marks Tate's. Ori's done. Kramer's grumpy but quiet. Case is wrapped, but I'm checking Zenith's moves." Wolfe skimmed the notes, his lips pursed. "Satisfactory. Dr. Vaughan's decision is prudent. Publication ensures the proof's safety. Zenith dynamics is neutralized. Their stooge was peripheral. Tate's conviction is assured. I leaned back, my coffee lukewarm. So we're really done. No last-minute shadow jumping out. Unlikely, Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. The equation balances. Motive, method resolution. Tate's greed was his undoing. The resonance lock his irony. I snorted, picturing the vault's keypad humming under Tate's device. Irony's right. Quayle builds a sonic lock, and it lets his killer in. You ever seen anything like it? Rarely, Wolfe said, flipping open a book. Number theory. Of course. Sound as a tool fascinates. Quayle's mind was exceptional. Tate's merely avaricious. I rubbed my temples, still marvelling at Wolfe's brain. You knew it was sound from the hum, didn't you? That janitor's story was the spark. Indeed, Wolfe said, his tone smug. The hum was an anomaly, demanding explanation. The note, the answer is 0, was the context. Logic did the rest. I grinned, shaking my head. Logic and a ton of nerve. That rumour I spread at the mixer. Pure genius or pure insanity? Strategy, Wolfe said, sipping a beer Fritz had slipped in. Provocation reveals truth. You executed it well, Archie. I blinked, caught off guard by the praise, rare as a desert bloom. Thanks, boss. What's next? Vaughan's visit. Affirmation, Wolfe said. Dr. Vaughan requires closure. Kramer a nod. Then we rest until the next puzzle. I nodded, picturing a quiet week, though with Wolfe, quiet was a pipe dream. At 11:10 the doorbell rang, and I let Vaughan in, who looked almost human. His satchel light, his glasses clean, his tie actually tied. He took the red leather chair, smiling faintly, a far cry from the wreck who'd hired us. Mr. Wolfe, he said, I owe you everything. Tate's gone, the proof's safe, and I'm publishing it, dedicated to Quayle. Thank you. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking. Your gratitude is noted, Dr. Vaughan. The proof's publication, your plans. A journal article, then a book, Vaughan said, his voice steady. I'm teaching again, no more hiding. Zenith's offer was tempting, but I'd rather sleep at night. Wise, Wolfe said, his eyes narrowing. The shadow, any lingering fears? Vaughan shook his head. None. Tate was it, or his lackey. I feel free. I hid a grin, impressed by his spine. You're tougher than you look, Doc. Vaughan chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard before. Necessity, Mr. Goodwin. I'll send you a copy of the article. Wolfe nodded, dismissing him with a wave. You will stay for lunch, Dr. Vaughan. Vaughan hesitated, then smiled. I'd be honoured. You will stay, Wolfe said, his tone final. Fritz is preparing roast lamb. I escorted Vaughan to the dining room, knowing Fritz's lamb would seal his recovery. Lunch was a triumph. Lamb, mashed parsnips, and a berry tart that could have made a jury sing. Vaughan ate with relish, while Wolfe savoured each bite, his brain clearly at ease. I watched them, marvelling at how a case that had nearly broken us could end with such calm. By 1 p.m, Vaughan was gone, promising to keep in touch, and I was back in the office, calling Kramer to confirm his 6 p.m. visit. He was gruff but agreed, curious about Wolfe's final word. I spent the afternoon typing up Vaughan's visit and the case's epilogue, my fingers lighter than they'd been in weeks. The vault's hum, the shadow's coat, Tate's burner phone. It was all fading, like a dream after waking. At 5:50, Kramer arrived, his bulldog face less sour, but still skeptical. I seated him near the globe, his unlit cigar twitching. Wolfe entered at 6, his bulk filling the room, a fresh orchid in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the flower, and fixed Kramer with a stare that was more diplomacy than smugness. For once, "Inspector," Wolfe said, "you are prompt. We meet to close Dr. Quayle's case, resolved with Dr. Tate's arrest. Questions?" Kramer leaned forward, his cigar steady. "You got Tate, Wolfe, but Zenith Dynamics, they're clean." "Peripheral," Wolfe said, his tone calm. "They funded Tate's greed, supplied a lackey for intimidation. Their calls to Dr. Varn are empty gestures. His publication will neuter their interest." Kramer grunted, almost a smile. "You've got a copy of that zero-key file for—" "Me? Dr. Varn provided one," Wolfe said, nodding to a USB drive on the desk. "Evidence, not leverage. The proof belongs to academia now." I handed Kramer the drive, impressed by Wolfe's restraint. He usually hates sharing. Kramer pocketed it, standing. "You're a pain, Wolfe, but you delivered. Don't expect a parade." "Nor desire one," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Justice suffices." Kramer left, the door closing softer than usual, a sign of grudging respect. I turned to Wolfe, who was sipping a fresh beer, his book open to number theory again. "That's it? No encore?" "The equation is solved," Wolfe said, his tone dry. "Motive was greed, method was ingenuity, resolution was logic. File the reports, Archie. Dinner is at 7. I grinned, dropping into my chair. "You ever think about retiring? Let me chase dames instead of shadows." "Retirement is stagnation," Wolfe said, flipping a page. "You thrive on pursuit, Archie. Dames or danger." I laughed, knowing he was right. I typed up Kramer's visit, my fingers dancing, the case's weight finally gone. The vault was open, the zero answered, and Varn was free. Tate's cell, Zenith's retreat, Kramer's nod. It balanced like Wolfe's equation. As I filed the papers, I caught his glance. Calm, eternal, a mind that turned chaos into order. Working for a genius isn't easy, but it's never dull, and I wouldn't trade it, not even for a quiet life. Chapter 15. The last zero. It was Thursday, May 2nd, and the Quayle case was finally starting to feel like a closed book, one I'd read cover to cover and was ready to shelve, though its echoes lingered like a tune you can't shake. Dr. Simon Tate was cooling his heels in a cell, convicted for Dr. Leonard Quayle's murder. And the locked vault that had haunted my dreams for weeks was just a concrete box again, its secrets laid bare by Nero Wolfe's relentless brain. I was in the office at 8 a.m., sipping Fritz's coffee and feeling like a marathon runner who'd crossed the finish line, bruised but upright, ready to wrap up the last scraps of a case that had been a wild ride from start to finish. Mondays, meeting with Dr. Elias Varn, had been the final bow, him announcing his plan to publish Quayle's prime number conjecture, a cryptographic breakthrough worth billions, with his name as co-author. Tate's arrest had freed Varn from the shadow that stalked him, a mix of Tate's intimidation and a Zenith Dynamics lackey, and he was back to teaching, his nervous tics fading. Inspector Kramer had taken the zero-key file as evidence, grudgingly admitting Wolfe's victory, while Dr. Margaret Hensley and Paul Rourke had slunk back to their lives, cleared but chastened. Saul Panzer Fred Durkin and Ori Cather were off on new jobs, their work on the case done, leaving me to file the reports and keep an eye on Zenith dynamics, just in case they tried stirring the pot again. The case had been a beast. Quails, death in a sealed vault, 10 by 12 feet, concrete walls, steel door, keypad lock. Solved by Wolfe's realization that Tate used Quayle's resonance lock, a sound wave trick to disrupt the keypad, slipping in during a sabotaged camera, glitch to bash Quayle with a desk tool and steal his proof. The note, the answer is 0, celebrated Quayle's Riemann Zeta breakthrough, twisted by Tate into a cruel jab, while Vaughn's threat, 0 is coming, was Tate's taunt to keep him scared. The hum the janitor heard, the cigarette, butts, the burner phone, it all fit, and yet I still felt a itch, like a case this big deserved one last look before I let it go. The phone rang at 8:45, snapping me out of my haze. It was Kramer, his voice gruff but less hostile than usual, like a bear waking up from hibernation. "Goodwin, I need to see Wolfe. Tate's trial's set, but I've got questions about that file. Can I come at 6 p.m? "Sure," I said, jotting it down. "What's bugging you?" "Loose ends," Kramer said. "Zenith's lawyers are sniffing around, claiming Tate acted alone. I want Wolfe's take." "6 it is," I said. "Bring your cigar, but don't light it." He grunted and hung up, a sound that was almost friendly. I wrote a note for Wolfe, Kramer at 6 p.m, questions on 0 key file, Zenith's lawyers, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I pulled out Vaughn's final report, sent yesterday, detailing his publication plans. A journal article next month, a book by fall, both dedicated to Quayle. The 0 key file's mechanics, acoustic resonance stabilizing zeta computations, were over my head, but its value was clear, and Vaughn's choice to keep it academic, not corporate, was a win for the good guys. I smiled, thinking of his shaky start and steady finish. A man who'd faced his fears and come out stronger. At 10:50, the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered, all 1/7 of a ton, in a grey suit with a yellow phalaenopsis in his lapel. Jor settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that suggested he was ready for a quiet day, while I was still tying bows on yesterday's chaos. "Archie," he said, "report." I handed him my notes. "Kramer's coming. At 6 wants your take on the 0 key file. Zenith's lawyers are making noise. Vaughn's publishing next month. Book by fall. All academic. Saul's done. Fred's done. Ori's done. Zenith's quiet, but I'm watching. Case is closed, but I'm double-checking the edges." Wolfe skimmed the notes, his lips pursed. "Satisfactory. Dr. Vaughn's course is wise. Publication diffuses the proof's allure. Zenith's posturing is toothless. Tate's guilt is ironclad. Kramer's visit is formality." I leaned back, my coffee cooling. Formality? He's fishing for something to soothe his pride. "Pride is his burden," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Justice is ours. The resonance lock fascinated me, Archie. Sound as a key to both intellect and crime." I grinned, picturing the vault's keypad humming under Tate's device. "Fascinated, huh? You were hooked the second you heard hum, weren't you? An anomaly demands scrutiny," Wolfe said, flipping open a book. "Number theory. Naturally. The note, the answer is 0, was the lens. Tate's greed was the flaw." I nodded, marvelling at his brain's gears. That mixer rumour was a masterstroke, pure Wolfe, poking the bear till it roared. Provocation reveals, Wolfe said, his tone dry. You played your part, Archie, with commendable nerve. I blinked, savouring the rare praise like a steak cooked just right. Thanks, boss. What's next? Kramer's ego stroking? Closure, Wolfe said. Dr. Vaughan's proof will ripple. Science, not scandal. We ensure its path is clear. I nodded, picturing a calm week, though with Wolfe calm was a mirage. I spent the morning typing up the case's final reports, my fingers lighter than they'd been in weeks. The vault's hum, Tate's shadow, Quayle's note, it was all fading, like a song you hum but don't need to hear again. At noon, Fritz called us to lunch, roast lamb, creamed spinach, and a berry tart that could have made a jury dance. Wolfe ate with relish, his mind at ease, while I kept the talk light, mostly about baseball to avoid case ghosts. By 2 p.m., I was back in the office calling Saul for a final check on Zenith Dynamics. He'd found nothing new. Their CEO was dodging reporters, their stock steady but unexcited. Fred reported Tate's wrench was in evidence, a perfect match for the junction box marks. Ori sent a cheeky note, saying he was free for poker if I was buying. I grinned, filing it all, feeling the case settle like dust after a storm. At 4 p.m., the phone rang. Vaughan, sounding almost cheerful, a far cry from the wreck who'd stumbled into our lives. Mr. Goodwin, the Journal accepted my article. It's happening. Quayle's legacy, mine too. Can I drop by tomorrow? Bring a draft? Sure, I said, smiling. Come at 11. Wolfe'll want to look. I owe him everything, Vaughan said. You too, Archie. I was a mess, but you kept me going. Just doing my job, I said, though his words warmed me like Fritz's coffee. See you tomorrow. I hung up, wrote a note for Wolfe. Vaughan's article accepted, visiting tomorrow at 11, and filed it, my mind drifting to the case's arc. Vaughan's terror, Tate's sneer, Wolfe's calm. It was a story I'd tell for years, minus the parts where I nearly got caught breaking into Quayle's office or chasing a shadow through our backyard. The zero-key file, with its zeta harmonics and resonance lock, was a marvel I'd never fully grasp. But its weight, the billions it could have made, the blood it cost, was real. At 5:50, the doorbell rang, and I let Kramer in, his bulldog, face less stormy but still set, his unlit cigar a permanent fixture. I seated him near the globe, offering water he ignored. Wolfe entered at 6, his bulk filling the room, a fresh orchid in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the flower, and fixed Kramer with a stare that was more courtesy than challenge. A rare mood. Inspector, Wolfe said, you seek closure. Ask your questions. Kramer leaned forward, his cigar steady. Tate's trial's next month, Wolfe. He's pleading guilty, no contest. But Zenith Dynamics, they're claiming they only talked to Tate, no funding. You buy it? Partially, Wolfe said, his tone calm. Zenith supplied a lackey, the Shadow's second face, to intimidate Dr. Vaughan. Their burner phone traces to Tate, not them. They're complicit, not culpable. Kramer grunted, scribbling a note. And the zero-key file. It's clean for evidence. Clean, Wolfe said, nodding to the desk where a copy lay. Dr. Vaughan's publication will render it public, stripping its value to rogues. Tate killed for a prize now lost. I hid a grin, Impressed by Wolfe's knack for turning a win into a lesson, Kramer pocketed the copy, his jaw loosening. "You're a smug bastard, Wolfe, but you nailed this. Tate's done, Varn's safe, and I'm not eating crow for once." "Crow is unpalatable," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Justice is sufficient." Mew stood, almost smiling, a miracle in itself. "Keep your nose clean, Goodwin. I don't want to see you in my precinct." "No promises," I said, escorting him out, the door closing with a soft click, a sound of finality. Back in the office, Wolfe was sipping a beer, his book open to number theory, his face a mask of contentment. "Comments?" I said, dropping into my chair. "A balanced ledger," Wolfe said, his tone dry. "Greed sparked the crime, ingenuity shaped it, logic closed it. The zero was both answer and cost." I snorted, staring at the desk where Quayle's note had sat. "Cost, yeah. Varn's got his life back, but Quayle's still gone. Mortality is immutable," Wolfe said, flipping a page. "We mitigate, not erase. Dr. Varn's work honours Quayle. Sufficient legacy." I nodded, picturing Varn's article, a beacon in a field Quayle loved. "You ever wonder what you do with $1 billion brain like his?" "Wonder is idle," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "I prefer my puzzles, crime, not ciphers. File the reports, Archie. Dinner is at 7. I grinned, my fingers itching to type, the case's weight gone like a fever breaking. The vault was open, the shadow gone, the zero solved. I typed up Kramer's Che. Visit, my mind clear. The story of Tate's fall and Varn's rise a neat arc. As I filed the papers, I caught Wolfe's glance. Calm, eternal, a mind that turned chaos into order. Working for him was a grind, a thrill, a life, and I wouldn't trade it, not for all the zeros in Quayle's proof. Chapter 16. Echoes of Zero It was Tuesday, May 7th, and the Quayle case was starting to feel like a war story I'd tell over beers someday, its edges softened by time, but its scars still sharp when I poked them. Dr. Simon Tate was locked away, awaiting trial for Dr. Leonard Quayle's murder, and the locked vault that had nearly driven me nuts was just a footnote in Nero Wolfe's ledger of triumphs. I was in the office at 8 a.m., sipping Fritz's coffee and feeling like a sailor who'd weathered a hurricane, now scanning the horizon for the next squall. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, probably sweet-talking his orchids into blooming, faster, leaving me to savour a rare, quiet moment while tying up the last threads of a case that had been a marathon of brain and brawn. Last week's visit from Inspector Kramer had been the final curtain call, with him grudgingly accepting Wolfe's victory and carting off the zero-key file as evidence. Dr. Elias Varn was moving forward, his journal article on Quayle's prime number conjecture, accepted, and a book deal in the works, both dedicated to the man whose death started it all. The vault's secret, a resonance lock using sound waves to disrupt its keypad, had been Tate's ticket in, letting him steal Quayle's billion-dollar proof and bash his skull during a sabotaged camera glitch. The note, "The answer is zero," was Quayle's zeta function triumph, twisted by Tate into a taunt, while Varn's shadow, Tate, and a Zenith Dynamics goon had kept him trembling. Saul Panzer, Fred Durkin, and Ori Cather were off on new gigs, their roles in cracking the case a badge of honour, and I was left to file the paperwork and keep an eye out for any ripples from Zenith's retreat. The phone rang at 8:45, cutting through my haze like a foghorn. It was Varn, his voice bright with a confidence I barely recognized, like a man who'd found his footing after a long fall. "Mr. Goodwin, the article's out next week. I'm bringing a draft to thank Mr. Wolfe in person. Can I come at 11? "You bet," I said, jotting it down. "Wolfe'll love it. How's the book going?" "Rough draft's done," Varn said. "It's Quayle's legacy, mine too. I'm teaching full-time, no more shadows. Zenith called again, offered a consultancy, but I told them to get lost." I grinned, picturing Varn's newfound spine. "Good for you, Doc. See you at 11. I hung up, wrote a note for Wolfe, Varn at 11. Article out next week, book draft done, Zenith rebuffed, and sent it to the plant rooms. Then I pulled out Varn's latest email, a courtesy update on the zero key file's impact. Cryptographers were buzzing, calling it a paradigm shift, though some warned its resonance lock could inspire less savoury uses. The vault's hum, Tate's burner phone, the cigarette butts. It was all history now, but I couldn't shake a twinge, like the case had left a ghost that whispered when I wasn't looking. At 9:30, the mail arrived, and among the bills was a plain envelope, no return address, postmarked from Chicago. I opened it, curiosity piqued, and found a single sheet with typed text. 0 was only the beginning. Watch for the next equation. No signature, no clue, just a chill down my spine. I locked it in the safe, deciding to show Wolfe later. He'd either call it a prank or start a new crusade. For now, I had Varn to prep for, and I wasn't about to let a cryptic note derail my morning. At 10:50 the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered all 1/7 of a ton in a brown suit with a yellow cattleya in his lapel. He settled into his chair, adjusted the orchid, and fixed me with a stare that suggested he was savouring the calm, while I was still bracing for the next wave. "Archie," he said, "report." I handed him my notes. "Varn's coming at 11. Article's out next week. Book draft's done. He's teaching and told Zenith to shove it. Kramer's quiet. Trial's set. Saul, Fred, Ori are off the clock. I'm watching Zenith just in case. Oh, and a weird letter came. No name. Says 0 was only the beginning. It's in the safe." Wolfe skimmed the notes, his lips pursed, pausing at the letter. "Curious. Retrieve it." I pulled the envelope from the safe, handing it over. Wolfe read it, his eyes narrowing, then set it aside with a grunt. "A jest, or a shadow of ambition. Will monitor. Dr. Varn's. Visit? Closure," I said, leaning back. "He's a new man, thanks to you. That resonance lock still blows my mind, sound as a key." "A marvel," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Quayle's intellect was a beacon, Tate's greed its eclipse. The note, the answer is 0, was both triumph and tragedy," nodded, picturing the vault's concrete walls. "You pegged it from the hum, didn't you? One clue, and you built the whole puzzle." "An anomaly is a spark," Wolfe said, flipping open a book, number theory, as always. The note focused it. Logic shaped it. Your rumour at the mixer was the bellows. I grinned, savouring the nod to my part. "Bellows, huh? Nearly got. Me torched, but it worked. You ever think about the proof's fallout? Varn's keeping it pure, but others might not." Wolfe grunted, sipping a beer Fritz had slipped in. "Science is a tool, Archie, neutral, like a hammer. Quayle's proof will build or break, depending on hands. Dr. Varn's are steady. I rubbed my temples, marvelling at his calm. Steadies. Good, I'm just glad we're done chasing shadows. Shadows persist, Wolfe said, his tone dry. That letter suggests vigilance. For now, we rest. I nodded, picturing a quiet week, though Wolfe's world never stayed quiet long. At 11:15 the doorbell rang, and I let Varn in, who looked like a professor again. Satchel light, glasses polished, tie knotted with care. He took the red leather chair, beaming, a draft of his article in hand, its title bold, Zeta Harmonics, a computational revolution. Mr. Wolfe, he said, handing over the draft, this is for you, my thanks. Quayle's proof, my contribution, it's real now. I'm free because of you. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking, skimming the article. Your gratitude is noted, Dr. Varn. The proof's impact, your expectations? Cryptography will change, Varn said, his voice steady. Secure systems, maybe new networks. I'm keeping it open. No patents, no firms. Quayle would have wanted that. Admirable, Wolfe said, his eyes narrowing. The resonance lock. Any concerns? Varn hesitated, then nodded. It's a risk. Someone could misuse the frequencies, security, systems, maybe weapons. I'm consulting experts to lock it down. I whistled, impressed by his foresight. You're thinking like a detective now, Doc. Varn chuckled, a sound of relief. Your influence, Mr. Goodwin. I'll send the book when it's done. Wolfe nodded, dismissing him with a wave. You will stay for lunch, Dr. Varn. Varn smiled, no hesitation this time. I'd love to. You will stay, Wolfe said, his tone final. Fritz is preparing shad-roe. I escorted Varn to the dining room, knowing Fritz's shad-roe would cap his transformation. Lunch was a masterpiece. Roe, creamed potatoes, and a lemon tart. That could have made a jury cheer. Varn ate with gusto. Wolfe savoured each bite, and I kept the talk light, dodging case ghosts for baseball and spring blooms. Varn's ease was a victory. A man reborn from fear to purpose, and I felt a quiet pride in our part. By 1 p.m, Varn was gone, promising to stay in touch, and I was back in the office, typing up his visit, my fingers dancing. The case was done. Vault opened, shadow caught, 0 answered. But that letter nagged me, a faint hum I couldn't ignore. I filed the reports, my mind drifting to the arc. Varn's panic, Tate's sneer, Wolfe's calm. It was a story of greed and genius, solved by logic and nerve, and I'd played my role, bait and bulldog, with a few bruises to show for it. At 3 p.m, I pulled the letter from the safe, rereading it. 0 was only the beginning. Watch for the next equation. I showed it to Wolfe again, who was sipping a fresh beer, his book open. Still think it's a prank? Possibly, Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. Or a challenge. Chicago is distant, its intent unclear. We wait, Archie, alert, not alarmed. I nodded, filing it mentally under trouble later. For now, the brownstone was quiet, the case closed, and I was content to let the world spin without us for a day. At 5 p.m, I called Saul, just to check. Zenith was silent, their CEO dodging the press, no new shadows. Fred and Ori sent notes, joking about a poker night, and I grinned, planning to fleece them soon. Dinner was at 7. Fritz's roast pheasant, Wild rice and a chocolate, taught that could have made a judge weep. Wolfe ate with relish, his mind at ease, while I spun a yarn about a ball game to keep things light. Afterward, in the office, he opened his book, and I leaned back, staring at the desk where Quayle's note had sat. "Comments," I said, fishing, for his final take. "A symmetry," Wolfe said, his tone dry. "Science seeks truth. Crime seeks gain. Justice seeks balance. Quayle's zero was a pivot, creation and destruction. We restored order." I snorted, picturing the vault's hum. "Order, sure. But you love the chaos, don't you? Keeps you sharp." "Chaos is a crucible," Wolfe said, his eyes glinting. "Intellect thrives there. You relish it too, Archie. Danger is your muse." I laughed, knowing he'd nailed me. Muse, maybe. I'm just glad this one's done. "For now," Wolfe said, flipping a page. "File the reports, Archie. Tomorrow awaits." I typed up the day, my fingers steady, the case's weight gone like a fever broken. The vault was silent, the shadow dust, the zero complete. That letter lingered, a faint echo, but I trusted Wolfe's radar to catch the next storm. As I filed the papers, I caught his glance. Calm, eternal. A mind that turned riddles into reason. Working for him was a grind, a rush, a life, and I'd chase 1,000 zeros before I'd trade it for anything else.